The 4-year-old beggar girl tells Millionaire, "Your son said he'd cut out my tongue. When he gets home, he does something to his son. Comment what you think will happen. Your opinion is very important, and subscribe to my channel to support. My work, your help is very important." The scorching midday sun of Phoenix, Arizona, turned the asphalt into an oven as Richard Sterling parked his silver Lexus in front of the mirrored skyscraper that housed Sterling Enterprises headquarters. At 52, he had achieved everything he'd ever dreamed of: a thriving real estate company, a mansion in Paradise Valley, and the respect of the local community. But at that moment, adjusting his Italian silk tie, he had no idea his life was about to crumble. The girl appeared as he locked his car, small, skinny, with tangled brown hair and clothes that had once been white in some distant past. Her large, dark eyes held a sadness that contrasted brutally with her apparent 6 years of age. Daisy approached timidly, extending her dirty little hand. "Mister, got any spare change so I can buy some bread?" Her voice was soft, almost a whisper, struggling against the noise of traffic on Central Avenue. Richard stopped. There was something about this child that touched him unexpectedly. Perhaps it was because she reminded him of himself decades ago, when he was begging on the streets of South Phoenix before he got an opportunity that changed his life. He searched his pocket for some coins, but the girl continued speaking, her innocent words about to shatter the world he thought he knew. "Mister, your son said he'd cut out my tongue if I didn't stop begging for money at your company." Time stopped. Richard felt as if the ground had opened up beneath his feet. "My son," he repeated, his voice hoarse. "How do you know my son?" Daisy tilted her head, confused by the man's reaction. "The tall boy, with the really short haircut. He comes here sometimes with other boys. They laugh at us and film us when we ask for food. He said his dad owns this big building." Richard's legs weakened. Ethan, his only son, 16 years old, the boy he had raised with so much love and dedication, who studied at the best private school in the city, who had everything money could buy. The same Ethan who for months had been asking for extra money for charity activities at school, claiming he wanted to help underprivileged children. "When was the last time you saw him?" Richard asked, crouching down to be at the girl's height, his hands trembling slightly. "Yesterday. He brought a little camera and kept saying he was going to make a movie with us. But then Miss Eleanor came and yelled at them to leave." Daisy lowered her eyes. "He got really mad and said if we didn't leave, something bad would happen to us." Richard closed his eyes, feeling nausea rising in his throat. Each word from the girl was like a stab in his chest. He had dedicated his entire life to building an empire precisely so that his children would never go through the humiliations he experienced in childhood. He had grown up in extreme poverty, the son of a cleaning lady who could barely put food on the table. He had promised himself that he would do things differently, that he would be a present and loving father. "Where do you live, sweetie?" he asked, pulling a $50 bill from his wallet. "With Ms. Eleanor, over in Maryvale. She takes care of me and some other kids." Daisy took the money with wide eyes. "Wow, mister, this is a lot. Ms. Eleanor will be happy. We can buy rice for the whole week." Richard felt his heart clench even tighter. $50, an amount that Ethan spent without thinking twice on a snack at the mall, was the difference between going hungry and having food for an entire week for those children. "What's your name?" "Daisy. And yours?" "Richard." He hesitated for a moment. "Daisy, if my son or his friends show up here again, you run and go find Ms. Eleanor, okay? And let me know too." He wrote his phone number on a scrap of paper. "Ask someone to call this number." The girl carefully put the paper in the pocket of her faded shorts. "You're different from your son, aren't you, Mr. Richard?" The simple question was like a punch to the gut. Richard couldn't answer. He just patted the girl's hair and headed into the building, each step weighing a ton. At the reception desk, he mechanically greeted the secretary and went straight to his office on the top floor. Throughout the rest of the afternoon, Richard couldn't concentrate on anything. He constantly looked out the window overlooking the street, searching for Daisy, but she had disappeared. The girl's words echoed in his mind like a broken record. Ethan filming underprivileged children for fun. Ethan threatening a 6-year-old girl. Ethan using his name to intimidate the most vulnerable. At 6 in the evening, he cancelled all the meetings for the next day and drove home with a heavy heart. The mansion in Paradise Valley greeted him with its imposing facade and well-manicured gardens, but for the first time in years, Richard felt suffocated by the opulence that surrounded him. Isabel, his wife of 45, was on the porch reading a book on child psychology. Ironic, considering what he had just discovered. Her blonde hair was pulled back in an elegant bun, and she was wearing a white dress that enhanced her tan. She worked as a child psychologist in a private clinic and had always prided herself on understanding children better than anyone. "Honey, you're home early today. Did something happen?" Isabel smiled, but the smile died when she saw the expression on her husband's face. "Where's Ethan?" "In his room, studying." "Why?" Richard climbed the marble staircase leading to the second floor, each step increasing his anxiety. The door to Ethan's room was closed, and he could hear soft music coming from inside. He took a deep breath and knocked. "Come in, Dad." Ethan was lying on his king-size bed, messing with the most expensive cell phone on the market. At 16, he was as tall as his father, but with more delicate features inherited from his mother. His brown hair was cut very short, just as Daisy had described. "Son, I need to talk to you about something very serious." The teenager didn't even look up from his phone. "What's up, Dad?" "Today I met a girl named Daisy. She told me some very disturbing things about you and your friends." For the first time, Ethan looked directly at his father. There was something in his eyes that Richard had never noticed before, a coldness that chilled him. Ethan sat up on the bed, finally giving his father his full attention. His green eyes, inherited from his mother, sparkled with a mixture of irritation and something Richard couldn't identify. Perhaps defiance. "Daisy? I don't know any Daisy, Dad." His tone was too casual, rehearsed. "Son, she described you perfectly, said you go downtown with your friends, that you film street children." Richard approached the bed, trying to keep his voice calm. "Explain this story to me." Ethan gave a short laugh, almost a sneer. "Oh, that crazy girl. Dad, you're not going to believe some beggar, are you? She must be making things up to get more money." The way his son pronounced the word beggar made Richard feel a chill down his spine. There was real contempt in that tone, a cruelty he had never imagined existing in his own home. "Ethan, look at me." Richard sat on the edge of the bed. "I know when you're lying. You used to make that same expression when you were little and hiding something from me." The teenager sighed dramatically. "Okay, Dad. We sometimes go downtown, yeah, but it's nothing serious. It's just to laugh a little. You know, those kids are really funny. They do some bizarre things when they see the camera." Richard felt his stomach turn. "Funny? Ethan, you're talking about children who are starving, who have nowhere to live. How can you find that funny?" "Oh, Dad, relax. It doesn't hurt anyone. It's just to have a little fun. Life here at home is really boring. Just study. And more study. We need some fun." "Fun?" Richard stood up abruptly. "Humiliating those who can't defend themselves is fun for you." Ethan crossed his arms, his posture becoming defensive. "You're exaggerating. We just take some pictures, make some videos. It's not like we hit them or anything." "What about the threats?" "Daisy said you told her you'd cut out her tongue." "She said that?" Ethan laughed again, but now there was a hint of nervousness in his voice. "Dad, I just told her to stop begging for money in front of your company. It was hurting the family's image. You don't want clients to see beggars at the front door of the building, do you? Richard looked at his son as if he were seeing a stranger. You threatened a 6-year-old child to protect the family's image? It wasn't really a threat. It was just a way to make her understand she couldn't stay there. Ethan, where did you learn to think like this? Your mother and I raised you to be a good person, to help those in need. The teenager scoffed. Help! Dad, you've spent your whole life stepping on others to get where you are. Now you want to play the good guy? The accusation hit Richard like a shot. What are you talking about? I know things, Dad. I know how you built this company. I know about the land you took from poor families who couldn't pay their debts. I know about the documents you hide in the safe in the office. Richard paled. In the early years of the company, he had indeed made questionable decisions. He had taken advantage of vulnerable situations to expand his business. But he thought he had left all that behind, that he had changed. That was a long time ago, Ethan. I was young, desperate to get out of poverty. And what am I, Dad? A saint? Ethan got out of bed, now face to face with his father. At least I'm honest about who I am. I don't pretend to be a kind person. You're not like this, son. I've known you since you were born. You've always been a sweet, loving child. I was a child, Dad. Now I've grown up, and I've discovered that the real world isn't the same as the fairy tales that Mom used to tell me. At that moment, Isabel appeared at the bedroom door. What's going on here? I heard you yelling from downstairs. Richard looked at his wife, not knowing how to explain the situation. Isabel, we need to talk about Ethan. What did he do now? She entered the room, immediately positioning herself between her husband and son, as she always did when there was conflict. Mom, Dad is making up some crazy stories about me. He said I'm threatening children in the street. Isabel looked from Richard to Ethan, confused. Richard, what is he talking about? Our son has been going downtown with his friends to humiliate street children. They film these children, make threats. That's ridiculous. Isabel laughed, but the laugh sounded forced. Ethan wouldn't do such a thing. You must have misunderstood something. A 6-year-old girl came to me today. She told me everything, Isabel. Described our son perfectly. A street girl? Isabel crossed her arms. Richard, you know better than anyone that these children often make up stories to get money or attention. Ethan smiled, seeing that he had his mother's support. See, Dad? Even Mom knows that doesn't make sense. Richard looked at the two of them, feeling completely isolated. Ethan, show me your cell phone. What? If you have nothing to hide, show me the photos and videos you have on your cell phone. The teenager took a step back. I'm not going to show you. I have a right to privacy. Richard, you're being paranoid. Isabel put her hand on her husband's arm. Our son is a good boy. Maybe you should think twice before accusing him based on the word of a stranger. Stranger? Richard moved away from his wife's touch. Isabel, you work with traumatized children every day. How can you dismiss a child's testimony like that? Because I know my son, and I know he would never do such a thing. Ethan took advantage of the tension between his parents to head for the door. I'm going to study at the library. When you guys stop arguing over some liar, call me for dinner. He left the room, leaving Richard and Isabel alone. The silence that followed was deafening. Richard sat heavily in the armchair in the room, putting his head in his hands. Isabel, I saw it in his eyes. There was a coldness that I had never noticed before. Richard, you're exaggerating. Ethan is a normal teenager. All boys his age do some mischief. Mischief? Richard raised his head. Threatening starving children is mischief to you? If that really happened, the phrase cut Richard like a blade. He realized at that moment that he was completely alone in this fight. His own wife had chosen not to believe the possibility that her son might be capable of cruelty. I need some time to think. Richard got up and headed for the door. Where are you going? to take a walk. I need to cool my head." As he walked down the stairs, Richard heard Isabel calling Ethan back to the room. He knew they would be talking about him, probably deciding that he was exaggerating, that he was seeing problems where there were none. But he knew that girl. There was something about Daisy that was impossible to ignore, a raw sincerity, a real pain in her eyes that could not be faked. And above all, he had recognized in himself the hunger and despair that he had seen in her. Now he needed to find out how far his son's cruelty went, even if it meant destroying the family he loved so much. The next morning, Richard woke up with a determination he hadn't felt in years. He had spent the night awake, lying on the sofa in the living room, while Isabel slept in the master bedroom. The distance between them was palpable, but he knew he needed to find out the truth about Ethan, even if it cost him his marriage. He arrived at the office before 7 in the morning and immediately called Damon Silver, a private investigator. He had hired a few times to investigate competitors and business partners. Damon was discreet, efficient, and above all, didn't ask unnecessary questions. "Damon, I need a favor. I want you to investigate my son." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Your son?" "Richard, this is very delicate." "I know. But I need to know if he's involved in questionable activities. I want you to find out where he goes, who he hangs out with, what he does when he's not at home or at school." "I can do that, but it will take time, and it will be expensive." "Money is not a problem, but I need absolute discretion. Not even my wife can know." After settling the details with Damon, Richard decided to do his own investigation. He got in the car and drove to Maryvale, one of the most impoverished areas of Phoenix. The unpaved streets and simple brick houses immediately transported him back to his childhood, when he lived in a place very similar to this. He found Eleanor's house by asking some locals. It was a small, humble building with peeling paint and a yard where some children were playing with rag dolls and improvised toys. When he knocked on the wooden gate, a woman of approximately 70 years old appeared. Eleanor was a small woman with completely white hair tied in a simple bun. Her calloused hands and face marked by the sun told the story of a lifetime of hard work. Her eyes, however, maintained a kindness that moved Richard immediately. "Good morning, Ma'am. I'm looking for Eleanor." "That's me. What do you want?" "My name is Richard Sterling. I met a girl named Daisy yesterday. She said she lives here with you." Eleanor's face closed immediately. "Are you with the police?" No. Actually, I wanted to talk about some boys who've been bothering the children downtown." Eleanor studied Richard for a few seconds, then opened the gate. "Come in, but take your shoes off, please." The house inside was even simpler than it looked from the outside. The small living room had only an old sofa, an old television, and some plastic chairs, but it was clean and organized, and there was a smell of home cooking coming from the kitchen. "Daisy," Eleanor called. "Come here, girl." The girl came running from the kitchen, wearing a simple but clean dress. When she saw Richard, her eyes lit up. "Mr. Richard, did you come to visit me?" "Yes, I did, sweetie. I wanted to talk to you more about those boys." Eleanor served coffee in simple mugs and sat down next to Daisy. "This story has left me very worried. These boys have shown up here about 3 times in the last month. Can you tell me what happened? The first time, they arrived pretending they wanted to help. They offered food, toys. The children were happy, right? It's not every day that people show up wanting to give presents." Eleanor shook her head sadly. "But then they started filming everything. They asked the children to do strange things." "What kind of things?" "They asked them to beg for food on their knees, to dance while they threw coins on the ground. Once they told the girls to get covered in mud to win a cookie." Richard felt bile rising in his throat. "And you allowed it?" "At first, yes. The children were hungry and they promised food in return. I didn't understand what was happening until I saw that they were laughing, mocking. Eleanor took Daisy's hand. "That's when I came yelling and told them to leave." "What did they do when you interfered?" "The tallest boy, who seemed to be the leader, got very angry. He said I had no right to interfere, that they were helping the children, but I saw the evil in his eyes." Daisy moved closer to Eleanor. "Auntie, tell Mr. Richard about what they said last time." "Oh yes, last time they brought a bigger camera. They wanted to film the children telling sad stories about what it was like to live on the street. They promised money to whoever told. The most moving story," Eleanor sighed. "When I said I wasn't going to allow it, the tall boy said we had no choice, that his father was very important in the city and could make our lives a living hell." "Did he mention his father's name?" "No. He just said he owned a lot of buildings and houses in Phoenix." Richard closed his eyes, confirming his worst fears. "Eleanor, are these children your daughters?" "No, son. They show up here and I take care of them. Some are orphans, others ran away from home because of violence. I myself was raised on the street, so I know what it's like. I do what I can with the pension I receive." "How many children live here?" "Now there are 7. There used to be 12, but some managed to return home or went to better shelters." Richard looked around the small house, imagining how 9 people managed to live there. "How do you support yourselves?" "With my pension and some donations received from the church. Sometimes the neighbors help with food. It's not much, but we manage." Daisy pulled on Richard's shirt. "Mr. Richard, do you want to see my drawings?" She ran to another room and returned with some papers scribbled with crayons. The drawings showed small figures being filmed by larger figures. In one of them, there was a clearly frightened person, with tears running down their face, while other people laughed around them. "This is when they made Maria cry," explained Daisy, pointing to the drawing. "They said that if she didn't cry for real, she wouldn't get the money." Richard held the drawings with trembling hands. The cruelty was documented there, seen through the innocent eyes of a 6-year-old child. "Daisy, do you remember anything else about these boys? Any names they said?" "They called the tallest one Ethan, and there was a fat one they called Pete, and another skinny one they called Jake." Richard knew the names. Pete was the son of the owner of the largest car dealership in the city. Jake was the son of a local judge. They all studied at the same school as Ethan, the most expensive and prestigious institution in Phoenix. "Eleanor, can I help you in any way? With food, medicine, anything you need?" The woman looked suspicious. "Why do you want to help? It's not often that rich people show up here in Maryvale wanting to know about our lives." Richard hesitated. He couldn't tell the whole truth, not yet. "I grew up in a place similar to this. I know what it's like to be in need. And after hearing about these boys, I feel like I need to do something to make up for it." "Do you know them?" "By sight. They're all from important families in the city." Eleanor nodded, as if that explained everything. "It's always like that. The rich think they can do whatever they want with the poor, and usually they can." Richard took $500 from his wallet. "This is to help with the expenses of the house, and I'll be back next week with some more things." "It's not necessary, sir." "It is necessary, and if these boys show up here again, you call me immediately." He wrote his number on a piece of paper, "At any time of day or night." As he was leaving, Daisy ran after him. "Mr. Richard, are you going to be able to make them stop bothering us?" Richard knelt down to the girl's height, looking directly into her eyes. "I'm going to try, sweetie. I promise I'm going to try." On the way back home, Richard felt nauseated by the reality he had discovered. His son wasn't just being cruel, he was leading a group of wealthy teenagers in systematic humiliations against vulnerable children. And worst of all, he was using the family's name and influence to intimidate anyone who tried to interfere. When he got home, he found Isabel in the kitchen preparing lunch. She didn't even look up when he entered. "Where were you?" she asked, not hiding the irritation in her voice. "Solving some work problems. Richard, we need to talk about yesterday. You can't keep accusing Ethan without proof." What if I get the proof? Isabel finally looked at him. What kind of proof? I'm going to find out the truth about our son, Isabel, with or without your help. At that moment, Ethan came down the stairs, already dressed to go out. Dad, Mom, I'm going to meet some friends at the mall. I'll be back for dinner. Richard watched his son carefully. What friends? Pete and Jake. We're going to study for the history test. The lie came out so naturally that Richard almost believed it. Almost. Have fun studying, he said, watching Ethan grab the keys to the car he had received as a birthday present. As soon as the teenager left, Richard took out his cell phone and called Damon. He just left. He's driving a white Civic. I want to know exactly where he goes and what he does. The investigation had officially begun, and Richard knew that there would be no turning back after the discoveries that were to come. 3 days later, Damon called Richard with information that would make his world crumble even further. The investigator's voice was tense, as if he himself was shaken by the discoveries. Richard, I need to meet you in person. What I discovered about your son is complicated. They met at a discreet coffee shop in downtown Phoenix, far from the places Richard used to frequent. Damon arrived carrying a black briefcase and a grave expression that did not hide his concern. Before I show you this, I need you to prepare yourself. What your son has been doing is worse than you imagined. Damon opened the briefcase and took out several photographs. The first ones showed Ethan, Pete, and Jake downtown, always carrying cameras or cell phones, but the following ones made Richard feel as if he had been punched in the stomach. They don't just go to Maryvale, Damon explained. They visit at least 4 different peripheral neighborhoods, and they have a very specific pattern of behavior. The photos documented the 3 teenagers interacting with street children in various locations. In one of them, Ethan appeared offering money to a boy who couldn't have been more than 8 years old, but only after the child agreed to get on all 4s and bark like a dog. I managed to get close enough to hear some conversations, Damon continued. They've created a kind of game. Each one has to get the children to do increasingly humiliating things. Whoever gets the most funny videos wins points. Points for what? They have an online group where they share these videos. Other teenagers from wealthy families watch and vote. The winner of the month wins money from the others. Richard felt nausea taking over his stomach. How many teenagers are involved in this? From what I've discovered, at least 8 families. From the local elite, sons of businessmen, politicians, judges, all students at St. Francis High School. My God! Richard put his head in his hands. How did they get to this point? Damon showed more photos, these taken inside a LAN house in downtown Phoenix. They meet here every week to edit the videos and plan the next actions. The owner of the establishment receives money to let them use the place privately, and no one has ever reported it? Richard, these are children invisible to society. Who is going to believe their word against the sons of the most influential families in Phoenix? Damon paused. Besides, they are very careful. They always film the children agreeing to participate, even if it's through blackmail or manipulation. Damon took his notebook out of the briefcase and showed some screenshots. I managed to access part of their online group. The name is Social Safari, and they treat the children like animals in a zoo. The images on the screen showed comments that made Richard want to vomit. Ethan appeared with the nickname Kitty Catcher, and his comments demonstrated a level of cruelty that seemed impossible to come from a 16-year-old raised with love. There's something even worse, Damon said, hesitating. They're planning something they call a special event for the end of the month. What kind of event? From what I understood from the conversations I intercepted, they want to do a kind of public competition, something involving several children at once, with live streaming to the online group. Richard closed his eyes, trying to process all that information. His son wasn't just a teenager playing pranks. He was the leader of an organized network of humiliation against vulnerable children. Damon, I need more details about this event. Date, location, how many people involved. I'm going to continue investigating. But Richard, you need to decide what you're going to do with this information. If this becomes public, my company will go bankrupt, my marriage will end, and my son may have very serious problems. Richard sighed deeply. But if I do nothing, how many more children will suffer? That afternoon, Richard returned home with the weight of the world on his shoulders. He found Isabel working on her patient reports at the dining room table. She looked up when he entered, and for the first time in days, showed genuine concern. You look terrible, Richard. What's going on? He sat down next to his wife, watching her blonde hair fall over her shoulders as she wrote. How could he explain that their son was capable of systematic cruelty? Isabel, what if I showed you irrefutable proof that Ethan is involved in something very serious? Would you believe it? What kind of proof? Photos, videos, evidence that leaves no room for doubt. Isabel dropped her pen and looked at him directly. Richard, our son may have his flaws, but he's not a monster. I've worked with traumatized children for 15 years. I know how to recognize signs of serious antisocial behavior. What if you're wrong? What if the emotional closeness to him is preventing you from seeing what's right in front of you? That's impossible. Why? Because... Isabel hesitated. Because if it were true, it would mean that I failed completely as a mother and as a professional. For the first time, Richard saw a crack in his wife's unwavering certainty. She was afraid, not of discovering that Ethan was cruel, but of discovering that there were signs that she should have noticed. Isabel, remember when Ethan was 8 years old and killed that neighbor's cat? He didn't kill the cat. It was an accident. He said it was an accident. But do you remember what the vet said? That the injuries weren't compatible with a fall. Are you insinuating that our 8-year-old son tortured an animal? I'm saying that maybe there were signs that we preferred to ignore. Isabel got up abruptly from the table. I'm not going to continue this conversation. You're trying to rewrite the history of our family based on paranoia. And you're refusing to see reality because it would question your professional competence. The accusation was like a slap in Isabel's face. She was silent for a long moment, then climbed the stairs without saying a word. That night, Ethan arrived home later than usual, with a look of satisfaction that made Richard uneasy. During dinner, the teenager was particularly animated, telling stories about school that sounded too false. Dad, I've been thinking, what if I organized a social project at school? Something to help underprivileged kids. Richard almost choked on his food. Social project? Yeah, we could collect clothes, food, toys, maybe even make some visits to the poorest neighborhoods to deliver the donations. The suggestion was so cynical that Richard felt pure anger coursing through his veins. Ethan was practically mocking him, proposing to use charity as a cover for his cruel activities. What an interesting idea, Richard said, forcing a smile. Tell me more about how it would work. Well, me and my friends could film these visits, to document the work, you know. Show other schools how to do similar projects. Film? Of course. Nowadays everything has to be documented on social media, otherwise it's like it didn't happen. Isabel, who had been silent for most of the dinner, smiled proudly. What a wonderful son I have, always thinking about helping others. Richard looked from Ethan to Isabel, realizing that he was completely alone at that table. His son was a psychopath in the making, and his wife was too blind to see. Or worse, either she was seeing and choosing to ignore it. I'm going to fully support this project, Richard said. In fact, I want to participate personally, accompany you on these visits. For the first time, Ethan's confident expression faltered. Ah, Dad, you don't need to. We can handle it ourselves. I insist. It would be a great opportunity for us to spend more time together, but you don't have time for these things. You're always busy with the company. For my son, I always have time. Ethan got up from the table, visibly uncomfortable. I'm going to finish a school assignment in my room. After the teenager left, Isabel turned to Richard. See how he's a good boy? Wanting to help those in need. Do you really believe that? Why wouldn't I believe it? Richard looked at the wife he had loved for over 20 years and realized that perhaps he didn't know her as well as he thought. Or maybe she had also changed over the years, becoming someone capable of ignoring reality to maintain the perfect image they had built. That night, alone in his office, Richard made a decision that would change everything. He called Damon. I want you to intensify the surveillance. And I want specific details about this special event they're planning. Richard, how far are you willing to go with this? As far as necessary to protect these children, even if it means destroying my own family. From upstairs, he could hear Ethan talking on the phone in his room, probably planning the next cruelty session with his friends. And in the master suite, Isabel was getting ready to sleep, probably proud of the kind son she had raised. Richard was in the middle of a war where the soldiers were his own family, and he still didn't know which side would win. A week later, Richard made a discovery that left him even more shaken. He was reviewing the family's bank statements when he noticed a series of cash withdrawals made by Isabel, amounts that totaled more than $3,000 in the last 2 months. When he questioned his wife during breakfast, she replied without showing any concern. It's for Ethan's activities at school. He's been participating in several social projects, and I want to support him. $3,000 in 2 months. What kind of social project costs that much? Richard, they're small amounts. 50 here, 100 there. To buy material, pay for transportation, sometimes to buy snacks for the children they help. Richard felt his stomach turn. Without knowing it, Isabel was financing her son's cruel activities. Every dollar she gave Ethan was converted into humiliation for starving children. Isabel, do you ask for receipts? Proof of how this money is being used. For what? I trust our son. He's always been responsible with money. I want to see the receipts. I don't have any receipts, Richard. And frankly, I think it's ridiculous that you want to control even the boys' spending on charity. At that moment, Ethan came down to have breakfast, wearing his impeccably pressed school shirt. His hair was styled with gel, and he was carrying an expensive backpack that Isabel had bought on her last trip to Scottsdale. Good morning, family. Mom, I'm going to need another $100 today. We're going to visit a new community, and we want to bring some supplies. Isabel immediately opened her purse and took out the bills. Of course, my love. What community is this? It's near the Salt River. There are several families there who need help. Richard knew the area. It was one of the poorest areas on the outskirts of Phoenix, where entire families lived in wooden shacks without basic sanitation. A perfect place for wealthy teenagers to humiliate the most vulnerable without witnesses. Ethan, how did you find out about this community? Pete knows a family from there. He said they're in need. What family? I don't remember the full name. I think it's the Smith family or the Jones family, something like that. The vague answer confirmed Richard's suspicions. Ethan was lying, with an ease that was both impressive and frightening. What time are you going? In the afternoon, after school. Great. I'll go with you. The silence that followed was tense. Ethan stopped chewing and looked directly at his father, his green eyes showing barely disguised irritation. Dad, you don't need to. We can handle it ourselves. Son, if you're doing such a beautiful job, I want to see it up close. I can even help these families financially, but you'll get in the way. People get embarrassed when they see someone very well dressed. They feel inferior. The observation was intelligent and almost convincing. Almost. Then I'll wear simpler clothes. I Don't want them to feel embarrassed. Isabel intervened, clearly annoyed with her husband's insistence. Richard, let the boys do their work in peace. They don't need supervision. I just want to support our son. Support him by giving him the money he needs, not by getting in the way. Ethan took advantage of his mother's support. That's right, Dad. You can help in other ways. In fact, if you want to make a larger donation, I can take it to distribute. How much would a larger donation be? About $500 would buy basic food baskets for several families. Richard pretended to consider the proposal. Okay, but I want the receipts for everything that is bought. Sure, Dad. I'll keep everything organized. After Ethan left for school, Richard immediately called Damon. They're going to the Salt River area this afternoon. I want you to follow them and document everything. I'm already on my way to school to track their movements. At 2 in the afternoon, Damon called with the first update. Richard, they didn't buy any supplies. They went straight from school to the LAN house downtown. What are they doing there? They're editing videos from previous sessions. I managed to position myself where I can see the screens. It's disturbing, Richard. They put funny music over the images of the children being humiliated. Keep following them. At 4 in the afternoon, another call. Now they're heading towards the Salt River, but they didn't take any food baskets, just the cameras and a small bag that seems to have some candy. Richard cancelled all his appointments for the day and drove discreetly to the area, keeping enough distance not to be seen. He parked behind a large tree and watched from afar. What he saw made him want to vomit. Ethan, Pete, and Jake were surrounded by 6 children who couldn't have been more than 10 years old. They were dressed in dirty and torn clothes, clearly malnourished. The teenagers had scattered some candy on the muddy ground and were filming the children fighting over the food like animals. Through the phone, Damon narrated the scene he was documenting with professional equipment. Now they're asking the children to imitate animal sounds to earn more candy. A girl of about 8 years old is crying, but continues to do what they tell her because she's hungry. Richard clenched his fists inside the car. This was his legacy. Under a son who turned human suffering into entertainment. Wait, there's something worse happening, Damon continued. They're asking the children to fight each other for a bag of cookies. They're filming everything and laughing. Richard couldn't stay still any longer. He got out of the car and started walking towards the group, but Damon intercepted him. Don't do it now. If you show up, they'll know they're being investigated. Let me document everything first. But these children, I understand your anger. But if you intervene now without enough evidence, they will be more careful and we will never be able to catch them. Richard returned to the car, but continued to watch from afar. Each laugh from Ethan was like a stab in his chest. How had he raised such a monster? At 6 in the evening, the teenagers finally left, leaving the children at the site with only a few candies scattered on the ground. Richard saw a little girl picking up the candies from the mud and eating them anyway. When he got home, he found Ethan on the sofa watching television, as if nothing had happened. How is the social work, son? Very good, Dad. We managed to help. Several families. We distributed food and talked to the children about the importance of education. That's good. And the receipts? Oh, I forgot to ask for them, but next time I'll ask. Isabel appeared in the room at that moment. How were our heroes today? They were great, Mom. I think we made a difference in the lives of those people. I'm so proud of you, my son. Seeing how you care about the less fortunate moves me. Richard watched the scene with growing horror. Ethan lied so naturally that he almost seemed to be telling the truth. And Isabel believed every word, feeding her son's ego and encouraging his activities. That night in the office, Richard reviewed all the evidence that Damon had collected. Photos, videos, audio recordings, everything meticulously documenting the systematic cruelty of his son. He had reached his limit. He knew he had to make a drastic decision, even if it meant destroying his family. But before that, he wanted to give Ethan one last chance, an opportunity for his son to confess and perhaps show some regret. If that didn't work, he would have to choose between protecting the family reputation or protecting innocent children. And he already knew what his choice would be, even if it cost him everything he had fought for in life. The next morning, he made a decision that would change everything forever. The next morning, Richard woke up with an iron determination. He had spent the entire night planning how to confront Ethan definitively. This time, there would be no room for lies or manipulations. He waited for Isabel to leave for the clinic and called Ethan for a conversation in the office. The teenager came down the stairs with his usual expression of boredom, as if any conversation with his father was a waste of time. "Sit there," Richard said, pointing to the armchair in front of the desk. "We need to get some things straight." Ethan threw himself into the armchair dramatically. "What now, Dad? More paranoia about beggars making up stories?" Richard turned on the notebook and turned the screen to his son. "I want you to watch this and explain to me what you're seeing." The video started playing, clearly showing Ethan, Pete, and Jake humiliating the children in the Salt River area. The image quality was sharp, the audio crystal clear. There was no way to deny or distort the facts. Ethan's expression changed gradually as he watched. Boredom gave way to surprise, then to fear, and finally to a cold anger that made Richard shiver. "Who filmed this?" asked the teenager, his voice dangerously calm. "That doesn't matter. What matters is that I have evidence of everything you've been doing." "How long have you been spying on me?" "Enough to find out about the online group, about the competitions, about the special event you're planning." Ethan leaned back in the armchair, studying his father with calculating eyes. "And what do you intend to do with this information?" "That depends on you. If you stop this now, seek psychological help, and ask for forgiveness from all the children you hurt, we can resolve this as a family." "And if I don't want to stop?" The question was asked with a coldness that left Richard speechless for a few seconds. Ethan was not showing remorse, guilt, or even fear of the consequences. He was just calculating his options. "If you don't stop, I'm going to hand over all this evidence to the authorities." Ethan laughed, a low laugh devoid of humor. "You wouldn't do that, Dad. It would destroy our family, your company, your reputation. You fought your whole life to get out of poverty. You're not going to throw it all away because of some street kids you don't even know. You underestimate my ability to do what is right. I know you better than you imagine." Ethan got up and walked to the window, looking out at the street with his hands in his pockets. Remember the Garcia family? Richard felt his blood run cold. The Garcia family had lost their house to him in the early years of the company, when Richard had used questionable tactics to force a foreclosure. That was 15 years ago. It was a business situation. It was a family with 3 small children who were left on the street because you wanted to expand your assets. Ethan turned to face his father. "Remember Ms. Peterson, the 70-year-old woman you evicted to build that commercial building?" "How do you know these things?" "Because I've been digging through your files for years, Dad. I know about all your business situations. I know about the documents you hide in the safe, the bribes you paid to speed up licenses, the land you took from families who couldn't pay their debts." Richard sat heavily in the chair. "I've changed, Ethan. I've learned from the mistakes of the past. No, Dad, you just got rich enough not to have to get your hands dirty personally anymore, but the essence is the same. You've always been a predator, only now you wear an expensive suit. That doesn't justify what you're doing, doesn't it? At least I'm honest about who I am. I don't pretend to be a good person while destroying lives for money. The people I harmed were adults in business situations. You're torturing innocent children for fun." Ethan returned to the armchair, now with an expression of superiority that deeply irritated Richard. You know what the difference is between us, Dad? You destroyed lives for greed. I do it for art. It's much more honest. Art? It's a form of expression. I'm documenting the social reality of our country, showing how the poor behave when they're offered scraps. It's almost anthropological. Richard looked at his son with growing horror. Ethan wasn't just being cruel. He was intellectualizing his cruelty, turning it into something sophisticated. You need help, son. Professional psychiatric help. I need you to stop bothering me. And you can start by stopping spying on me. That's not going to happen. Ethan sighed as if he were dealing with a bratty child. Dad, I'm going to propose a deal to you. You stop this ridiculous investigation, and I'll consider reducing the frequency of my activities. It's not a negotiation, Ethan. You're going to stop completely, or I'm going to the authorities. Even knowing that it will destroy our family, even so. Even knowing that Mom will never forgive you? Richard hesitated. This was his greatest weakness, and Ethan knew it. Even knowing that your company will go bankrupt when the media finds out that the owner's son is a monster. Even knowing that you'll go back to the poverty you fear so much, if necessary. I don't believe you, Dad. You're too cowardly to sacrifice everything you've built. Want to bet? I do. Ethan got up again, walking towards the door. But before you make any drastic decisions, maybe you should know one thing. What? It's not just me. Mom knows everything. The words hit Richard like lightning. What do you mean? Do you really think she believes these stories about social projects? She's a psychologist, Dad. She works with traumatized children every day. She knows exactly what kind of behavior I exhibit. That's a lie. 3 months ago, she saw one of the videos on my cell phone by accident when she was helping me with a school assignment. Ethan smiled coldly. You know what she said? Richard, who couldn't answer. She said that as long as I didn't physically hurt anyone, it was just an adolescent phase. That all boys do mischief when they're bored. I don't believe it. Want to ask her? You can call her at the clinic now. Richard felt as if the ground had disappeared beneath his feet. If Ethan was telling the truth, it meant that Isabel not only knew about her son's activities, but also silently approved of them. Why would she do that? Because we're a family, Dad, and families protect each other, even when one member does questionable things. Questionable things? You're talking about psychological torture. I'm talking about a teenager having fun with some street urchins who will never amount to anything anyway. In the grand scheme of things, it's irrelevant. The coldness with which Ethan dismissed the children's suffering was the last straw for Richard. He stood up abruptly, walking to the safe hidden behind a painting. What are you doing? Richard entered the combination and took out a folder of documents. I'm going to show you what's irrelevant. He spread photographs of all the children Damon had documented being humiliated by the group on the table. Daisy was among them, her large, sad eyes captured at the exact moment when Ethan forced her to imitate a dog for a piece of bread. Look at these photos, Ethan. Take a good look at the faces of these children. I've already seen them. They're just some more irrelevant people. This irrelevant person, Richard pointed to Daisy's photo, is 6 years old and lives in a house with 7 other orphan children. She eats once a day when she's lucky, and you turn her hunger into entertainment. So what? I didn't create her poverty. But you take advantage of it in a cruel and systematic way. Ethan looked directly into his father's eyes, just like you've done your whole life, only in a more subtle way. The comparison was like a knife in Richard's heart, because in a way, his son was right. He had spent decades taking advantage of the vulnerability of others to build his fortune. The difference was that he had always rationalized it as business, while Ethan was brutally honest about his cruelty. The difference, Richard said finally, is that I can change, and you're going to change too, even if I have to put you in a psychiatric clinic to do it. The threat finally reached Ethan. For the first time in the conversation, he showed genuine fear. You wouldn't do that. Test me. At that moment, They both heard the front door opening. Isabel had arrived earlier from the clinic. Ethan and Richard exchanged glances, both knowing that the next hour would define the future of the Sterling family forever. Isabel climbed the stairs with hurried steps, carrying a work folder and a bouquet of flowers she had bought on the U-way. Her heels echoed on the marble as she headed to the office, drawn by the tense voices she heard from inside. "Richard, Ethan, what are you doing locked in there?" She opened the door and immediately perceived the tension in the air. Richard was standing behind the desk with an expression of contained fury, while Ethan remained in the armchair with a provocative smile on his face. "You've arrived just in time, Mom. Dad is having one of his paranoia attacks again." Isabel looked from one to the other, placing the flowers on a nearby shelf. "What's going on here?" Richard took a deep breath, knowing that the decisive moment had arrived. "Isabel, sit down. I need to show you something." "Richard, I'm tired. It was a difficult day at the clinic. This is more important than anything that happened at your clinic today." The husband's grave tone made Isabel finally pay attention. She sat down in the second armchair in the office, noticing the photographs scattered on the table. "What are these photos?" "They're evidence of our son's activities in recent months." Richard turned the notebook to her and played one of the videos that Damon had captured. The image clearly showed Ethan and his friends forcing young children to humiliate themselves in exchange for food. Isabel watched in silence for a few minutes, her expression gradually changing from confusion to something Richard couldn't decipher. "Ethan told me that you already knew about this," Richard said, observing every micro-expression on his wife's face. "He said that?" Isabel looked at her son, who maintained his relaxed posture in the armchair. "He said you saw one of the videos 3 months ago and considered it just an adolescent phase." Isabel was silent for a long moment, looking alternately at her husband and her son. When she finally spoke, her voice was strangely calm. "It's true." The 2 words hit Richard like a punch in the stomach. "What do you mean it's true?" "I saw a video on Ethan's cell phone a few months ago. I saw him and his friends interacting with street children, and you didn't think you should tell me?" "Why? So that you would do exactly what you're doing now. An unnecessary scandal." Richard sat heavily in the chair, trying to process what he was hearing. "Isabel, our son is psychologically torturing defenseless children." "Torturing is too strong a word, Richard. He's playing with them. Yes, it's immature and insensitive, but it's nothing that can't be corrected with time. Playing." Richard pointed to the photos on the table. "You call this playing?" Isabel picked up one of the photographs and examined it with the same clinical coldness she used to evaluate her patients. "I see a teenager testing social boundaries. It's typical behavior for his age. You work with traumatized children every day. How can you normalize this?" "Exactly because I work with trauma is that I know how to differentiate adolescent games from real violence." Isabel put the photo back on the table. "Ethan isn't hitting these children. He isn't sexually abusing them. He's just exploring power dynamics." Richard looked at the woman he had been married to for over 20 years as if he were seeing a stranger. "Exploring power dynamics?" "Richard, you grew up in poverty. I know this triggers emotional responses in you, but you need to separate your personal traumas from the objective reality of the situation." "My personal traumas?" "You're projecting your own childhood humiliation experience onto these children. But the truth is that they're receiving food and attention that they normally wouldn't have." Ethan smiled, clearly pleased with his mother's defense. "See, Dad? Mom understands that it's not that serious." Richard stood up abruptly, walking to the window. "Isabel, are you telling me that as a child psychologist, you consider it acceptable for wealthy teenagers to humiliate starving children for entertainment?" "I'm saying that you're dramatizing the situation. Ethan is in a phase of discovering his own identity. He's experimenting with different forms of social interaction, and the children who suffer in these experimentations, they're resilient. Children in vulnerable situations develop very strong adaptation mechanisms. They'll overcome this. Richard turned to face his wife, feeling as if she had transformed into someone completely different before his eyes. "Who are you?" "The Isabel I know would never talk like this about suffering children. The Isabel you know is a mother protecting her son from a father who has lost perspective." "Protecting? You're protecting cruel behavior." "I'm protecting our family." Isabel stood up, her posture becoming more rigid. "Do you want to destroy everything we've built because of some street kids who don't even know us?" "Some street kids?" "Isabel, listen to what you're saying." "I'm being practical, Richard. These children exist by the thousands throughout Phoenix. Our son is unique. Our family is unique." Ethan stood up too, clearly excited by the direction of the conversation. "See, Dad, Mom understands that family comes first." "Ethan, shut up." Richard turned again to his wife. "Isabel, when did you become a person capable of dismissing the suffering of children like that?" "When I married a man who built a fortune, exploiting the vulnerable, and decided that I wasn't going to let him destroy our family for a fit of late guilt." The accusation was like a slap in Richard's face. "This has nothing to do with my past. It has everything to do with it. You're trying to redeem yourself from your own sins through our son. But I'm not going to allow you to use Ethan as a scapegoat for your heavy conscience." "Scapegoat? He's committing acts of deliberate cruelty. He's being a teenager, and if you continue with this obsession, you're going to destroy his self-esteem permanently." Richard looked at Ethan, who watched the discussion with interest, as if it were a spectacle created for his amusement. His self-esteem, and the self-esteem of the children he humiliates. "They're not our responsibility." "How can you say that? You dedicate your professional life to helping children." "I dedicate my professional life to helping children I can actually help. These street children have structural problems that go far beyond what my son does or doesn't do." Isabel walked to the table and began to collect the photographs. "By the way, where did these photos come from? Did you hire someone to spy on our son?" "I hired a private investigator." "You hired an investigator to spy on our family?" Isabel's voice rose several tones. "Richard, that's sick. Sick is what our son has been doing. Sick is you not trusting your own family. Sick is you believing strangers more than your wife and your son." Ethan approached his mother, putting his arm around her shoulders in a protective gesture. "Mom, Dad is getting paranoid. Maybe he needs psychological help." Isabel looked at her son with genuine affection. "Maybe you're right, my love." Richard watched the scene with growing horror. Mother and son united against him, treating him as if he were the problem of the family. "You two have completely lost your sense of reality." "We're protecting our family, Richard. You're the one attacking it. I'm trying to save my son's soul." "No," Isabel said coldly. "You're trying to save your own soul, and you're willing to sacrifice our family to do it." Richard looked at the two of them, his wife and his son united against him, justifying cruelty as family protection. He realized at that moment that he was completely alone. "If you're not going to stop this," he said finally, "I will." "How?" "By handing over all the evidence to the competent authorities." Isabel and Ethan exchanged glances, a silent communication passing between them. "If you do that," Isabel said slowly, "you won't have a family to come back to." "I don't have a family anymore. You've turned into people I don't recognize." "No, Richard. You're the one who's turning into someone we don't recognize, and we're not going to let you destroy our lives because of it." The threatening tone in Isabel's voice made Richard realize that the family war was just beginning. That night, Richard barely managed to sleep. Every time he closed his eyes, He saw Daisy's face being humiliated by his own son, while his wife justified everything as normal adolescent behavior. In the morning, he found Isabel having coffee in the kitchen, dressed impeccably for another day of work, as if nothing had happened. "I need to go in earlier today. I have a meeting with the clinic's board," she said, without looking up from the newspaper. "Isabel, we can still talk about yesterday. There's still time to gauge. There's nothing to talk about, Richard. You need to decide whether you want to be part of this family or whether you want to destroy it." Ethan came down at that moment, wearing his school uniform with the same arrogance as always. "Good morning, family. Mom, I'm going to need $200 today." "What for?" asked Richard, before Isabel could answer. "Social project, Dad. We're going to visit a new community." The blatant lie made Richard feel rage boiling in his veins. "What community?" "You don't know it. It's pretty far from here." Isabel took the money out of her purse without hesitating. "Here you go, my love. And don't forget to take water and sunscreen." The naturalness with which she financed her son's cruel activities left Richard stunned. "Isabel, you know very well what this money is being used for. I'm financing my son's social activities, something that should make me proud as a mother." Ethan put the money in his pocket and headed to the door. "Bye, family. I'll be back tonight." "Ethan," Richard called him, "if you leave this house today, there will be consequences." The teenager stopped at the door, turned and smiled. "What kind of consequences, Dad?" "I'm going to call Pete's and Jake's parents. I'm going to show them the evidence I have. I don't believe you'd do that. It would be declaring war against the most influential families in Phoenix." "Test me." Ethan exchanged a look with Isabel, who made an almost imperceptible gesture with her head. The teenager smiled again. "Dad, before you do anything rash, maybe, you should take a look at this." He took an envelope out of his backpack pocket and threw it on the kitchen table. "I found this digging through your office last night, after our conversation." Richard opened the envelope with trembling hands. Inside were copies of documents that he thought were safely stored in the safe. Fraudulent contracts from the early years of the company, proof of bribes paid to public officials, and especially the complete documentation of the Garcia family case. "Where did you get this?" "I told you, Dad. I've been digging through your files for years. I've known the safe's combination since I was 12. Isabel approached the table and examined the documents. "Wow, Richard, this is pretty compromising." "You don't understand. This was a long time ago. The statute of limitations. The statute of limitations doesn't apply to some of these crimes," Ethan interrupted. "I did some research, especially those related to tax evasion and collusion with other businessmen." Richard felt the ground disappear beneath his feet. "What do you want to? We want you to stop this obsession about my activities," Ethan said, "and we want you to fire this private investigator you hired." "And if I don't do that?" Isabel answered for him. "If you don't do that, a copy of these documents will end up in the hands of the district attorney, and another copy will go to the main newspaper in the city." "You're blackmailing me?" "We're protecting our family," Isabel corrected, "the same way you should be doing." Richard looked at the documents scattered on the table. Each paper represented a questionable decision he had made in the desperation to get out of poverty. Decisions he had managed to bury and forget over the years. "These crimes have prescribed. None of this can legally affect me now." "Maybe not legally," Ethan said, "but socially? Imagine when your clients find out that the respectable Richard Sterling built his fortune stealing houses from poor families. Imagine when your competitors find out that you paid bribes to get licenses," added Isabel. "Your company won't survive the scandal." "And imagine," continued Ethan, "when they find out that you're trying to destroy your own son's life to hide your own criminal past." Richard realized the perfect trap they had set. If he denounced Ethan, they would reveal his past crimes. If he tried to use his influence to protect his son, he would be seen as an accomplice. And if he did nothing, he would continue to indirectly finance the torture of innocent children. You thought of everything, didn't you? We thought of protecting our family, repeated Isabel. Something you should be doing too. Protecting the family doesn't include allowing my son to turn into a sociopath. Your son is fine, Richard. You're the one having trouble accepting that he's not the perfect child you imagined. At that moment, Richard's phone rang. It was Damon. Don't answer, Ethan said, unless you want these documents to reach the district attorney today. Richard, let the phone ring until it went to voicemail. What do you want me to do? First, you're going to call this investigator and fire him. Forever. Second, you're going to stop spying on our son, and you're going to support his activities normally. And third, Isabel and Ethan looked at each other again. Third, said Isabel, you're going to increase Ethan's allowance to $500 a week. $500 a week to finance tortures. $500 a week for his social activities, corrected Ethan. And if you cooperate, these documents will be kept safe forever. Richard looked at his family, his wife, who had revealed herself capable of blackmail, and his son, who used cruelty as entertainment. How had he reached this point? And if I accept these conditions, do you promise that you'll stop hurting innocent children? We promise that we'll be more careful, said Ethan, and that you won't worry about it anymore. Being more careful isn't stopping. It's the best you're going to get, Dad. Accept it or face the consequences. Richard spent the next few minutes in silence, weighing his options. He could accept the blackmail and live with the guilt of knowing that he was financing the suffering of children, or he could denounce everything and see his life completely destroyed. There was a third option, but it was risky and desperate. Okay, he said finally. I accept the conditions. Ethan smiled triumphantly. I knew you'd make the right choice, Dad. But I want something in return. What kind of return? I want to personally meet these communities you visit. I want to see the social work you're doing. Isabel frowned. Why? If I'm going to finance it, I want to know how my money is being used. It's a non-negotiable condition. Ethan hesitated, clearly uncomfortable with the idea. Dad, this will interfere with our work. It's take it or leave it. Either you include me in these visits, or I make everything I know public, even if it destroys me too. Mother and son looked at each other again, communicating silently. Okay, said Ethan finally. You can come, but you have to follow our rules. What rules? Don't interfere in what we do, don't question our methods, and don't talk to any of the children alone. Richard nodded, but internally he was planning something completely different. If he was going to be forced to witness his son's cruelty, at least he would ensure that the children knew that not all adults were like Ethan, and above all, he would document everything in a way that neither Isabel nor Ethan could prevent. When is the next visit? Tomorrow afternoon, said Ethan. And Dad? Yes? If you try anything to harm us, these documents will be in the press before nightfall. Richard nodded, but inside he felt a growing determination. The time had come to choose definitively between protecting his reputation or protecting innocent children, and he already knew what his choice would be, even if it cost him everything he had fought for in life. The next afternoon, Richard found himself in the passenger seat of Ethan's car, driving to an area even poorer than the previous ones. The teenager had insisted on driving, claiming he knew the way better, but Richard suspected it was a way to maintain control over the situation. "Where are we going exactly?" asked Richard, observing the increasingly precarious houses along the dirt road. "It's a new community we discovered," replied Ethan, without taking his eyes off the road. "Pretty isolated. The families there rarely receive visitors. Pete and Jake were already waiting at the agreed location, along with equipment that included 2 professional cameras, and a bag with what appeared to be food. "Your dad really came," commented Pete when Richard got out of the car. "He wanted to see our social work up close," explained Ethan with an ironic smile. Jake, the skinniest of the group, seemed nervous about Richard's presence. "Are you sure this is a good idea?" "Relax. He already understood how things work," said Ethan, patting his friend on the shoulder. They walked along a narrow path that led to a set of shacks built on the banks of a polluted stream. The smell of sewage mixed with wood smoke was almost unbearable. Richard counted at least 15 makeshift constructions where dozens of people seemed to live in subhuman conditions. "How many children live here?" asked Richard. "About 20, maybe more," replied Ethan casually. "Most of them orphaned or abandoned. It's perfect for our work." The choice of words made Richard shiver. Perfect to torture children who had no one to protect them. When they arrived at the center of the community, several children approached curiously. Some couldn't have been more than 4 years old. Others appeared to be 10 or 12. All were visibly malnourished and wearing dirty and torn clothes. "Look who's here," said Ethan loudly, assuming a theatrical personality that Richard had never seen. "We brought some little gifts for you." The children crowded around the group, their eyes shining with hope. Richard felt his heart clench at seeing such need and vulnerability. "But before the gifts," continued Ethan, turning on one of the cameras, "how about we play some games?" "What kind of games?" asked a girl of about 8 years old, who was holding a baby that must have been her brother. "We're going to have a contest," announced Pete, also assuming an artificially cheerful tone. "Whoever gives the best presentation wins more food." Jake started filming while Ethan scattered some candy on the muddy ground. "The first game is simple," said Ethan. "You're going to crawl to the candies and pick them up with your mouths without using your hands. Whoever gets the most wins a special snack." Richard watched in horror as the children, driven by hunger, immediately threw themselves on the ground and began to fight over the candies like animals. The 3 teenagers filmed everything, laughing and making comments that were inaudible to the children, but clearly cruel. "That's right, faster, who's stronger?" shouted Pete, encouraging the competition. A small girl, who couldn't have been more than 5 years old, began to cry when she couldn't get any candy. Ethan immediately directed the camera at her. "Why are you crying?" he asked with false concern. "I wanted a candy too," sobbed the girl. "Oh, you want a candy? Then let's make a deal. If you act like a kitten, walk on all fours and meow, I'll give you 2 candies." The child, desperate for food, immediately got on all fours and began to meow. Ethan filmed every second, his expression showing pure satisfaction with the humiliation. Richard felt nausea rising in his throat. He wanted to intervene, but he knew that this would mean the immediate exposure of his past crimes. He was trapped, forced to watch his own son torture innocent children. "Now let's go to the second game," announced Jake. "We want you to tell us the saddest stories of your lives. Whoever can make us cry for real wins a whole food basket." The children cheered at the possibility of winning food for their families. One by one, they began to tell devastating stories about abandonment, hunger, domestic violence. Each account was more painful than the last, and the 3 teenagers filmed everything with expressions of barely disguised amusement. "My mom left when I was 3 years old," said a boy of about 9 years old. "My dad drinks a lot and sometimes forgets to give me and my siblings food. Yesterday we didn't eat anything all day. How sad," and said Ethan with sarcasm that only Richard could detect. "And what do you do when you're hungry?" "We look for food in the trash," replied the boy innocently. "In the trash? How disgusting. Film this, guys. This one eats trash." The boy didn't understand that he was being mocked and continued smiling, hoping to receive the promised food. Richard couldn't take it anymore. "Ethan, I think we have enough material." "We're not finished yet, Dad. We have one more special game. Ethan addressed the children again. Now we want you to fight each other. The last one standing wins real money. Ethan, no, said Richard, stepping forward. Dad, you promised not to interfere. This is too far. It's just a little wrestling game. It won't hurt anyone. But the children, desperate for the possibility of winning money, had already begun to push each other. What started as a game quickly turned into a real fight, with young children hurting themselves to try to please the wealthy teenagers. "Stop!" shouted Richard, running to separate the children. "Dad, you're ruining our recording," protested Ethan. "I don't care. This is over now." Richard helped a small girl who had fallen and was crying with a bleeding knee. When he looked at her, he had a shock. It was Daisy. "Mr. Richard," she exclaimed, recognizing him immediately. "You came to visit us." Daisy's presence there was no coincidence. Ethan had planned everything specifically to force Richard to witness the humiliation of the girl who had denounced the group's activities. "What are you doing here, sweetie?" asked Richard, hugging the girl. "Miss Eleanor said I had to come stay with my grandma for a few days. She lives here." Ethan approached with the camera still on. "What an interesting coincidence, isn't it, Dad? Finding your little friend here. Turn that camera off now." "Why? We're just documenting our social work. I told you to turn it off." Ethan smiled coldly. "Dad, you're forgetting our agreement. If you don't collaborate, those documents—" "I don't care about the documents anymore, don't you? Even knowing that it means jail for you." Richard looked at Daisy, who was watching him with total trust, and then at his son, who was blackmailing him while filming the suffering of innocent children. "No," he said finally, "I don't care anymore." Ethan's expression changed. For the first time, he seemed genuinely concerned. "Dad, you're not thinking straight. I'm thinking more clearly than I have in years." Richard pulled his cell phone out of his pocket and started dialing a number. "What are you doing?" "Calling the police. If you do that, you'll regret it. For the rest of your life. I already regret every day for having created a monster like you." Ethan signaled to Pete and Jake, who immediately stopped filming and began to pack up the equipment. "Dad, last chance. Hang up that phone, or you'll find out what happens when you mess with the wrong family." Richard looked at Daisy, who was still clinging to him, and made the decision that would change everything. "Hello? Police? I want to report a case of child abuse." What he didn't know was that Ethan had a contingency plan that would make that call the biggest mistake of his life. Before Richard could complete the call, Ethan made a quick gesture to Pete, who immediately knocked the cell phone out of his hands. The device flew through the air and fell into the polluted stream, disappearing into the muddy waters. "Have you gone crazy?" shouted Richard. "No, Dad. You're the one who's gone crazy, and now you're going to have to deal with the consequences." Ethan made another signal to his friends, who quickly began running towards the car. "Let's go, now!" "Wait, you can't leave me here." "You bet we can. Good luck walking home, Dad. It's just a 15-kilometer hike." The three teenagers ran away, leaving Richard alone with the children of the community. Daisy was still clinging to him, frightened by the confusion. "Mr. Richard, why did they leave, and why are you angry?" Richard knelt down next to the girl, trying to calm down. "Because they're not good people, sweetie. They were hurting you, and I couldn't let that continue. But they brought us candy. Daisy, when someone offers you food but asks you to do things that make you sad or ashamed, that's not kindness. That's evil." The girl was silent for a moment, processing the information. "Are you going to take care of us now?" The innocent question hit Richard hard. How could he explain to a 6-year-old child that he was trapped in an impossible situation? "I'm going to try, sweetie. I'm going to try." Richard spent the next 2 hours in the community, talking to the children and some adults who showed up. He discovered that this was not the teenagers' first visit. They had been coming here for at least 2 months, always with the same dynamics of humiliation disguised as charity. "Those boys are strange," said a woman of about 60 years old, who introduced herself as the grandmother of some of the children. They always make the children do weird things to get food. And you never reported it? Report to whom, mister? The police don't come here even when someone kills someone. And besides, they always leave some food. For those who are starving, any help is welcome. Richard understood the cruel logic of the situation. Ethan had deliberately chosen a community so isolated and desperate that people would accept any humiliation in exchange for food. When it started to get dark, a boy from the community offered to take Richard back to the city on an old motorcycle. During the bumpy ride, he had time to think about his situation. Ethan had run away from home. This meant that the teenager was desperate enough to take drastic measures, and a desperate Ethan was extremely dangerous. When he finally got home, it was almost midnight. The mansion had all the lights on, and there were 2 police cars parked at the entrance. Isabel ran to him as soon as she saw him getting off the motorcycle. "Richard, where were you? I've been worried for hours." "Where's Ethan?" "We don't know. He arrived home at 6 in the afternoon, grabbed some clothes and said he was leaving. He left a note saying that you had tried to hurt him." 2 policemen approached. "Richard, Mr. Sterling, I'm Sergeant Miller. We need to talk to you." "About what?" "Your son made a very serious complaint against you. He claims that you physically threatened him and tried to force him to participate in illegal activities." Richard felt the world spinning around him. "That's a lie! It was exactly the opposite." "Do you have any way to prove that?" "Of course. I have evidence that my son has been torturing underprivileged children for months." The policeman exchanged skeptical glances. "Torturing? Humiliating? Filming? Forcing starving children to humiliate themselves for food?" "Mr. Sterling," said the sergeant patiently, "your son showed us some very disturbing videos where you appear shouting at young children and forcing them to fight each other." Richard paled. "What do you mean?" "He has recordings from this afternoon, recordings where you clearly appear verbally assaulting vulnerable children." "That's impossible! I was protecting those children." "That's not what the video shows, sir." Isabel approached her husband, her expression a mixture of disappointment and disgust. "Richard, what did you do to those children?" "I didn't do anything. It was Ethan. He edited the videos to make it look like I—" "Dad?" Everyone turned. Ethan had appeared at the entrance of the property, accompanied by Pete and Jake. The teenager looked visibly shaken, with rumpled clothes and red eyes, as if he had been crying. "Ethan? Where were you?" Isabel ran to hug her son. "I was scared, Mom. Dad forced me to go to that horrible place, and then he became very violent with the children. I tried to defend them, but he said he would hurt me if I interfered." "That's a lie!" shouted Richard. "You know that's a lie." "Mr. Sterling, we're going to need you to come with us to give a statement," said the sergeant. "Pay attention to what you're doing. My son is a sociopath. He planned all this." "Dad, please stop shouting," said Ethan in a trembling voice. "I just want you to get help. I love you, but I can't let you hurt innocent children." The performance was so convincing that even Richard almost believed it for a second. Ethan had completely transformed the narrative, painting himself as the heroic victim who tried to protect children from an abusive father. "Isabel, you know that's not true," said Richard, looking directly into his wife's eyes. "I know that my son would never lie about something so serious," she replied coldly. "And I know that I have evidence that proves my son's innocence," said Ethan, taking an envelope out of his pocket. "Evidence of the crimes that my father committed in the past and that explain his current behavior." He handed the envelope to the sergeant. "My father is having a nervous breakdown because of the guilt of the crimes he committed when he built his company. He's projecting that guilt on me and innocent children." The sergeant opened the envelope and examined the documents. His expression became increasingly serious as he read. "Mr. Sterling, I'm going to have to ask you to come with us. These documents suggest involvement in serious criminal activities." These documents were stolen from my office. Dad, I didn't steal anything. I found them by chance when you asked me to get some papers from your safe. Ethan looked at the policeman with a sincere expression. When I saw what was there, I understood why he's been acting so strange lately. Richard realized that he was in a perfect trap. Ethan had used his own past crimes as ammunition, painting him as a mentally collapsing criminal who projected guilt on innocent children. Sergeant, please, give me at least a chance to explain my version of the facts. You'll have an opportunity to explain everything at the station, Mr. Sterling. As he was being led to the patrol car, Richard saw Ethan hugging Isabel, both looking relieved that he was being taken away. Pete and Jake watched the scene with barely disguised satisfaction. "You planned all this," said Richard to Ethan when he passed by him. "I just defended myself, Dad, the only way I could. This won't end like this." "It will," whispered Ethan, low enough for only Richard to hear. "Because now you're officially a fugitive criminal who threatens children, and I'm just a brave teenager who denounced his own father to protect innocence." As the patrol car drove away from the mansion, Richard looked out the back window and saw his family, or what was left of it, entering the house. Ethan waved at him with a cold smile, as if he were saying goodbye forever, and maybe he was, because Richard was beginning to realize that he had completely underestimated the intelligence and cruelty of his own son. Richard spent 3 days at the police station, being interrogated about charges ranging from child abuse to forming a criminal organization based on the documents that Ethan had handed over. During all this time, his company was left without direction, and rumors about his arrest spread quickly through the Phoenix elite. When he finally got a lawyer and was released on bail, he discovered that his life had completely collapsed. Robert Teixeira, his minority partner, had taken control of the company and was trying to distance Richard's name from all business. "Richard, you need to understand the situation," said Robert when they met in the office that had once been Richard's. "The local press is covering the case. Clients are cancelling contracts. I can't associate the company with child abuse scandals. Robert, you've known me for 15 years. You know I would never harm a child." "I know, but I also know about the documents that appeared, and I know that your reputation is destroyed, regardless of the truth." Richard looked around the office that he had built with so much effort. Everything seemed the same, but at the same time completely different. "What are you proposing? That you sell your stake in the company to me? For a fair value, considering the circumstances." "How much?" $300,000. Richard almost laughed at the irony. The company that was worth more than $2 million was being offered for a fraction of the real value. That's less than 20% of the real value. "It's what I can pay, considering that I'm going to have to completely rebuild the company's reputation. And if I don't accept, then I'm going to partner with other investors and create a competing company. You know I have enough contacts for that. And frankly, at this point I would have more credibility in the market than you." Richard knew that Robert was right. His reputation was ruined, and fighting against it would only prolong his financial agony. "I need time to think." "You have until tomorrow. After that, the offer is withdrawn." When he got home that afternoon, he found an even worse situation. Isabel was in the living room with a lawyer he didn't know, papers scattered on the coffee table. "Richard, I need to talk to you," she said without getting up from the sofa. "This is Mr. Harrison, my lawyer." "Your lawyer?" "I'm filing for divorce." The words hit Richard like a punch in the stomach. "Why?" "Because I can't live with a man who threatens defenseless children anymore, and because I need to protect Ethan from more trauma." Richard looked at the woman he had been married to for over 20 years. "Isabel, you know these accusations are false. I know that my son is emotionally devastated for having to denounce his own father, I know that he needs therapy to overcome the trauma of having grown up with an abusive father. Richard looked at the woman he had been married to for over 20 years. An abusive father. Isabel, I've dedicated my life to giving you two the best. Giving the best materially, maybe. But emotionally you have always been distant and apparently violent. When have I been violent? Mr. Harrison spoke for the first time. Mr. Sterling, we have testimonies from witnesses who confirm episodes of aggression against your son over the years. What witnesses? People close to the family who witnessed or knew about situations where you demonstrated aggressive behavior. Richard realized that he was being the victim of a systematic smear campaign. Ethan hadn't just planned his downfall. He had orchestrated a complete narrative that transformed Richard into the villain of the story. Where's Ethan now? In intensive therapy, replied Isabel. Mr. Harrison obtained a court order that gives me exclusive temporary custody, considering the risk you represent. Risk? What risk? The risk of a man who is clearly going through a psychological breakdown and projecting his guilt on innocent family members. Richard sat heavily in an armchair. Do you really believe this, or is it just convenient for your purposes? We believe in what we see, said Mr. Harrison, and what we see is a pattern of concerning behavior that culminated in threats against vulnerable children. What about the crimes of the past that appeared in the documents? That will be treated separately, replied the lawyer, but it demonstrates a pattern of antisocial behavior that explains recent events. Isabel stood up, signaling that the conversation was over. Richard, you have 3 days to leave this house. Mr. Harrison has already filed for temporary alimony for me and Ethan. Alimony? You're going to have to pay $5,000 a month until the divorce is finalized? With what money? You destroyed my company. That's not our problem. It's a consequence of your choices. That night, alone in the mansion that would soon no longer be his, Richard tried to process how he had reached that point. In less than a week, he had lost his company, his family, and his reputation, all because he had tried to protect innocent children from the cruelty of his own son. The next day, he received an unexpected visit. Damon, the private investigator he had hired, appeared at the door with a worried expression. Richard, I heard. What happened? I came to offer you help. What kind of help? I still have all the evidence we collected about your son. I can testify about what was really happening. Damon, if you do that, you're going to become the target of the same smear campaign that destroyed my life. I don't care. What I witnessed was real. Children were suffering. Richard felt a small spark of hope. Are you sure? Absolutely. And there's one more thing. I continued investigating even after you dismissed me. I discovered something about Ethan's past that can change everything. What? He's not your biological son. The words left Richard speechless for a few seconds. What do you mean? Isabel had an affair 17 years ago with a psychologist. From the clinic where she worked, Ethan is his son. That's impossible. I have the evidence, DNA tests that she did at the time, hidden from you, and I have more. This psychologist had a history of personality disorders. He was fired from the clinic for inappropriate behavior with patients. Richard sat down, trying to process the information. Why did Isabel hide this from me? Because the guy disappeared when he found out about the pregnancy, and because you were a much better option as a father and provider. So I spent 16 years raising another man's son as if he were my own, and trying to instill moral values in a child who may have inherited sociopathic tendencies from his biological father. The revelation explained a lot. Ethan's coldness, his ability to manipulate, the ease with which he lied, and above all, it explained why Isabel was so determined to protect him. She knew that if the truth about the paternity came to light, She would lose everything. Damon, can you prove this? I can, and more. I can prove that Isabel knew about Ethan's behavioral problems since he was little. She has psychological reports of him saved for years, reports that show clear signs of conduct disorder. She was protecting a sociopath, knowing that he was a sociopath? Exactly. And using you as a scapegoat when the situation became unsustainable, Richard felt a mixture of anger and relief. Anger for having been deceived for so many years, and relief for finally understanding that he hadn't failed as a father. He had simply never been that child's father. What do we do with this information? First, we cancel this divorce. Then we use the evidence to expose the truth about this whole situation. And if they try to destroy me even more? Richard, you've already lost almost everything. You have. Nothing left to lose. But you have a lot to gain by fighting for the truth. For the first time in weeks, Richard smiled. There was a chance, however small, to reverse the situation and expose Ethan and Isabel for what they really were. Let's do it, he said. Let's show all of Phoenix who the real monsters are in this story. What he didn't know was that Ethan had also prepared a final surprise, one that would test the limits of Richard's ability to fight for justice. The next morning, Richard and Damon headed to the office of lawyer Mr. Thompson Moore, known for accepting complicated cases and having an impeccable reputation in Phoenix. When they presented all the evidence collected over the months, the lawyer was visibly impressed. "This is explosive," said Mr. Moore, examining the paternity documents and Ethan's psychological reports. "If we can prove all this in court, we will not only reverse the charges against you, but also expose a fraud that lasted 17 years. "What's our best strategy?" asked Richard. "First, we're going to contest the divorce and the criminal charges simultaneously. Second, we're going to file a lawsuit for moral damages against Isabel for concealment of paternity. Third, we're going to ensure that the authorities properly investigate the real abuse that Ethan has been committing." Damon leaned forward. "Doctor, there's something else you need to know. I discovered that Ethan is planning something he calls a final event. I managed to intercept some messages from his online group." "What kind of event?" "From what I understood, they want to do one last big humiliation before the investigations intensify. Something involving live streaming to a larger audience." Mr. Moore became serious. "This could be the definitive evidence we need. If we can catch them in the act, with witnesses and adequate documentation, the case becomes irrefutable. But we run the risk of more children suffering while we collect evidence," pondered Richard. "It's a calculated risk. But if we intervene too early, they may destroy evidence or simply transfer their activities to another location." That afternoon, Richard received an unexpected call. It was Eleanor, the woman who took care of Daisy. "Mr. Sterling, I need to talk to you urgently." "What happened, Eleanor?" "It's about Daisy. She disappeared 2 days ago. And it wasn't the first time." Richard felt his blood run cold. "What do you mean disappeared?" "Some men came here saying they were from social services. They had official papers, said she had to go to a temporary family while they investigated my situation." "What men?" "I didn't know them. But they had a nice car and spoke like educated people. The girl didn't want to go, but they said it was mandatory." Richard knew immediately that they weren't from social services. It was Ethan escalating his campaign of terror. "Eleanor, do you have any document that they left?" "I have. But my daughter read it and said it seemed strange, too poorly written to be a government thing. I'm going to pick up that document now, and I'm going to find Daisy." When he arrived at Eleanor's house, Richard examined the fake document that the kidnappers had left. It was a crude imitation of official papers, but it had worked with simple people who had no experience with government bureaucracy. "Mr. Sterling," said Eleanor, There's one more thing. Daisy said she recognized one of the men, said it was the bad boy who hurt her, only older. Older? She said he looked different, taller, with a beard, but that the eyes were the same. Richard realized that Ethan had disguised himself to kidnap Daisy. But why? What was the purpose of taking that girl specifically? The answer came the next day, when he received an envelope without a sender in his mailbox. Inside, there was a single photograph. Daisy in a place he didn't recognize, but that seemed to be an abandoned warehouse. On the back of the photo, there was a message written in Ethan's handwriting. "Dad, if you want to see your little friend again, you're going to have to choose between saving her or destroying our family. I'll meet you today at 8 p.m. at the address. On the map. Come alone, without lawyers, without investigators. If you bring anyone or involve the police, the girl will find out what happens when someone interferes in my business." Along with the photo, there was a rudimentary map indicating a location on the outskirts of the city. Richard immediately called Damon. They took Daisy. Who? Ethan and his friends. They staged a kidnapping to force me to give up exposing them. Richard, this is very dangerous. We have to call the police. If I call the police, they may hurt her. If you go alone, they may hurt both of you. Richard looked again at Daisy's photo. The girl looked scared, but not hurt. There was still time to save her. "Damon, I'm going there, but I want you to follow me at a distance. If something goes wrong, then call the police. This is crazy. It's the only chance I have to save that child." At 7:30 in the evening, Richard drove to the location indicated on the map. It was a complex of abandoned industrial warehouses on the outskirts of Phoenix, where several companies had failed during past economic crises. When he arrived at the specific warehouse marked on the map, he found the main door ajar. He entered cautiously, using the cell phone's flashlight to guide himself in the darkness. "Dad, glad you came!" Ethan's voice echoed from the back of the warehouse. Richard followed the sound and found a scene that horrified him. Ethan, Pete, and Jake had set up a kind of improvised stage, with professional filming equipment and lighting. In the center of the stage, Daisy was sitting in a chair, visibly scared but apparently unharmed. "Welcome to the final event of Social Safari," said Ethan with a theatrical smile. "Today we're going to resolve our family situation once and for all." "Let the girl go, Ethan. She has nothing to do with this." "Of course she does. She was the first to try to harm us, remember? It's only fair that she's the last too." Richard approached slowly. "What do you want?" "We want you to confess publicly that you invented all these stories about us to hide your own crimes. And if I do that, the girl goes home safe and sound, and our family goes back to normal. And if I don't," Ethan gestured to Pete, who pointed a camera directly at Daisy, "then we're going to broadcast live what happens when someone tries to destroy respectable families." "Broadcast to whom?" "To our online audience. We have more than 50 people watching at this moment, including several influential adults who find our work educational." Richard realized that he was facing something much worse than he had imagined. Ethan hadn't just created a group of cruel teenagers. He had developed a network of adults who enjoyed watching children being tortured. "Ethan, this is sick, even for you." "This is evolution, Dad. We're democratizing entertainment, showing civilized people how the other half of society really lives." "You're sick. We're being honest about human nature, and you're going to help us demonstrate that." Ethan pointed to a table where there were papers. "There's a full confession there. You admit that you invented the accusations against me, that you're the real abuser, and that you're having a mental breakdown. And if I sign this, Daisy goes home. You go to a psychiatric hospital where you'll receive the treatment you need, and our family continues living in peace." Richard looked at Daisy, who was watching him with total trust, waiting for him to save her. Then he looked at Ethan, who was awaiting his answer with the same cold expression that he had learned to hate. I need to read the confession first. Of course, but be quick. Our audience is getting impatient. As he headed to the table, Richard heard an almost imperceptible noise coming from the outside of the warehouse. Damon had arrived with reinforcements. It was time to end this nightmare. Once and for all, Richard picked up the papers from the table, pretending to read them while trying to buy time. He could hear subtle movements outside the warehouse. Damon was positioning people strategically before acting. "You're taking too long, Dad," said Ethan impatiently. "Our audience wants to see action. There are too many pages. I need to understand what I'm signing." "It's simple. You confess that you're a lying criminal who invented stories about his own son to divert attention from his past crimes." While pretending to read, Richard noticed that Daisy was making small gestures with her hands. The clever girl was trying to communicate with him, indicating that her ties weren't as tight as they seemed. "One question before signing," said Richard. "Why did you choose exactly Daisy? Of the hundreds of children you tortured, why is she special?" Ethan smiled maliciously. "Because she's not just any street urchin. She's special indeed." "How so?" "Tell him, Daisy. Tell him who you really are." The girl looked confused at Ethan. "I don't understand." "Of course you do. You remember your life before arriving at Eleanor's house, don't you?" "I don't remember anything before arriving there." "Liar!" Ethan approached the girl aggressively. "You know very well that your family has been looking for you for years." Richard approached too, protecting Daisy. "What are you talking about?" "Our little beggar here is Daisy Fairmont, daughter of Judge Franklin Fairmont, one of the most traditional families in Phoenix." The name hit Richard like lightning. The Fairmont family was practically local royalty, landowners for generations, and with political influence that extended throughout Arizona. "That's impossible." "It's very possible. She disappeared 3 years ago when she was 3 years old. There was a car accident that killed her parents. Everyone thought she had also died, but the body was never found." Daisy was listening to everything with an expression of total confusion. "I don't understand any of this." "Of course you don't," continued Ethan. "You developed childhood amnesia because of the trauma. You spent years wandering the streets until you arrived at Eleanor's house." "How did you find out about this?" asked Richard. "Research, Dad. When you started to take an interest in her, I decided to investigate who she really was, and I discovered that we were playing with the heiress to one of the biggest fortunes in the state. And what do you intend to do with this information? That's the most interesting part of our broadcast today. We're going to return the little one to her family. Live for our audience." Pete approached with the camera. "People, prepare yourselves for the surprise of the night. Soon we're going to reveal to a desperate family that their missing daughter is alive." "You're sick," said Richard. "You're turning the reunion of a family into a spectacle." "We're doing a good deed," replied Ethan, "and documenting to show that we've always been on the side of good." At that moment, the lights of the warehouse turned on all at once. Damon entered, accompanied by 4 policemen and a woman that Richard recognized as a social worker. "Nobody move," shouted Sergeant Miller, the same one who had arrested Richard days before. "What's up, guys?" said Ethan, immediately changing to his persona of innocent teenager. "We were just trying to reunite a family." "Reunite a family by kidnapping a child?" "It wasn't kidnapping. We saved her from an irregular situation, and we were trying to return her to her legitimate family." The social worker approached Daisy. "Hi, honey, my name is Sarah. I came to help you." "Aunt Sarah, I'm scared," said Daisy, finally relaxing at seeing trusted adults arriving. Damon approached Richard. "We got everything. The online transmission, the messages from the group, the equipment. We have enough evidence to prosecute all of them. And the story about Daisy's family, it's true. We confirmed it with Judge Fairmont. They've really been looking for their daughter for 3 years. Ethan, realizing that his narrative was collapsing, tried one last gamble. People you don't understand. My father forged this whole situation to frame me. He brought you here to harm me. Ethan, we have recordings of everything that happened. Here tonight, said Sergeant Miller, including your confessions about torturing children. They were jokes, educational, social activities. Social activities don't include kidnapping and blackmail. Pete and Jake tried to escape through the back of the warehouse, but were intercepted by other policemen that Damon had positioned strategically. While the three teenagers were being detained, Sarah spoke gently with Daisy. Daisy, do you remember anything about your life before living with Miss Eleanor? A little bit. I remember a big house with a garden, and I remember a pretty woman who sang to me. That woman may have been your mother, but my mother died. Ms. Eleanor said, Honey, sometimes the people who take care of us tell us stories to protect us from very painful memories. Richard approached the two. Daisy, remember when you told me that I was different from my son? I remember. You were right, and now we're going to find out who your real family is, okay? Are you going with me? If you want me to, I will. At that moment, Ethan shouted from the other side of the warehouse where he was being handcuffed. Dad, you can't do this to me. I'm your son. Richard turned to face him for the last time. No, Ethan. You were never my son. And now I know why. What are you talking about? I'm talking about DNA tests that prove that you're not my biological son. I'm talking about a mother who deceived me for 17 years. The revelation left Ethan visibly shaken for the first time. That's a lie! It's the truth. Just as it's true that your mother always knew about your behavioral problems and chose to hide them. My mother loves me. Your mother protected you because she knew that if the truth about your paternity came to light, she would lose everything. She used you and used me to maintain a lie that lasted almost 2 decades. Ethan was taken to the patrol car, shouting threats and incoherent accusations. Pete and Jake followed him, both crying and asking to call their parents. When the warehouse finally became silent, Richard knelt down next to Daisy. Sweetie, your life is going to change a lot from now on. For the better? Much for the better. You're going to discover that you have a family that loves you and has been looking for you for a long time. And you? Are you going to be okay? Richard smiled, realizing that for the first time in weeks, he felt truly at peace. I'm going to be great, because I finally did the right thing. Sarah approached again. Mr. Sterling, Judge Fairmont is on his way. He wants to thank you personally for helping to find his daughter. He doesn't need to thank me. Any decent person would do the same thing. Not every decent person would be able to face their own family to protect a child. While they waited for the arrival of the Fairmont family, Richard watched Daisy playing with some toys that Sarah had brought. The girl who had suffered so much was about to discover that she belonged to one of the most respected families in the state, and he, who had lost almost everything, had gained something much more valuable. The certainty that he had chosen the right side of the battle between good and evil. Now there was only one last chapter to definitively close that story of pain and redemption. 3 months later, Richard was sitting in the garden of a simple but cozy house he had bought on the outskirts of Phoenix. It was very different from the mansion where he had lived for so many years. Smaller, humbler, but infinitely more peaceful. Next to him, Eleanor was watering the flowers they had planted together the week before. Mr. Sterling, the lady has arrived, announced Eleanor, pointing to a car approaching on the dirt road. From the car descended an elegant woman of approximately 40 years, accompanied by a girl who ran immediately towards Richard. Mr. Richard, shouted Daisy, throwing herself into his arms. In the 3 months since the reunion with her biological family, Daisy had transformed completely. Her hair now shone with health, she had gained weight, and she was always smiling. But most importantly, she had maintained her natural sweetness despite all the trials she had faced. "How are you, sweetie?" asked Richard, hugging her affectionately. "I'm great. I want to tell you some very important news." The woman who had gotten out of the car approached. It was Ms. Caroline Fairmont, sister of Judge Franklin, and who had assumed custody of Daisy after medical exams confirmed that the girl's father was still recovering from the trauma of having lost his wife and believed to have lost his daughter. 2. Mr. Sterling, as always, thank you so much for receiving Daisy. I know these meetings mean a lot to her. They mean a lot to me too, Ms. Fairmont. In the months following Ethan's arrest, Richard had gone through a process of total reconstruction of his life. The divorce from Isabel had been finalized quickly when all the evidence about the false paternity and her connivance with Ethan's crimes came to light. She had lost custody of the teenager and now faced lawsuits for complicity in the abuse of the children. Ethan was interned in a psychiatric clinic specializing in adolescents with conduct disorders, where he finally received the treatment he had always needed. Pete and Jake were also in treatment, and their parents had created a compensation fund for all the children who had suffered at the hands of the group. "Mr. Richard, guess what?" said Daisy excitedly. "My dad is much better. The doctors said that next week he can meet me again." "What wonderful news, sweetie. And you know what else? He wants to meet you too. He wants to thank you personally for saving me," Ms. Fairmont smiled. "My brother has been insisting on this for weeks. He says, 'You're the hero of our family.' I'm no one's hero, ma'am. I just did what any decent person should do." Not every decent person would be able to face their own family to protect a child they barely know. Richard looked at the simple house where he now lived. He had sold his stake in the company for a fraction of the real value, lost the mansion in the divorce, and had to rebuild his life practically from scratch. But strangely, he had never felt richer. "Actually, Ms. Fairmont, I discovered that I didn't sacrifice anything important. I just got rid of things that I thought were valuable, but that were actually just weight." "Mr. Richard, tell Ms. Fairmont about your new work," asked Daisy. "What new work?" asked Ms. Fairmont with curiosity. "I started working with Eleanor here. We take care of abandoned children and help needy families in the region. He's very good at it," added Eleanor. "The children love him, and he has very good ideas to improve our situation here." "We're building a small school," explained Richard. "Nothing grandiose, but enough so that the children of the region have access to basic education." "With what resources?" "Judge Fairmont has been very generous, and I've gotten some supporters in the city who believe in the project." Ms. Fairmont was impressed. "In just 3 months you've achieved this? When you have a real purpose, it's amazing how things fall into place," replied Richard. At that moment, a young man of approximately 20 years approached the group. It was John, Eleanor's eldest son, who had returned from Los Angeles where he worked to help with the school project. "Mr. Sterling, the materials for the library have arrived. Where do you want us to put them?" "In the room we set aside for that." "And John, how many times do I need to ask you to call me just Richard? It's difficult, sir. You deserve respect." Daisy laughed. "He's stubborn indeed, Mr. Richard, just like you." During lunch, which they ate all together on the simple table, on the porch, Daisy told about her new life. She was studying at an excellent private school, taking piano lessons, and had become very close to Ms. Fairmont and her cousins. But the most important thing, she was gradually recovering the memories of her childhood before the accident. "Sometimes I dream with my mother," she said, "and they're not sad dreams, they're happy dreams where she's singing to me. That means you're healing," said Richard, "and that the good memories are stronger than the bad ones. It's like what happened to you." "How so?" "Ms. Fairmont explained to me that you also had a difficult life before meeting me. But now you're happy." Richard looked around the table. Eleanor serving food with maternal affection, John enthusiastically planning the school, Ms. Fairmont talking about ways to expand the project, and Daisy at the center of everything, radiating the joy of a child. who had finally found safety. You know, Daisy, you're right. I had a difficult life before meeting you. I was lost, making wrong choices, raising a person who I thought wasn't my responsibility. But you taught me something very important. What? That family isn't about blood or money or social status. Family is about choosing to love and protect the people who need us. Miss Fairmont was moved by the words. Mr. Sterling, my brother would like to make a proposal to you. What kind of proposal? He wants to completely finance your project here, not just the school, but a complete structure to serve vulnerable children from all over the region. That's very generous, but it's not generosity. It's justice. You returned our daughter to us. We want to help you return other children to the dignity they deserve. That afternoon, after Ms. Fairmont and Daisy left, Richard walked alone to a small hill behind the house. From there, he could see the entire region where he now worked. Simple houses, hard-working families, children playing in the street without fear. It was so different from the view he had from the window of his old office, where he observed buildings and expensive cars, symbols of a success that he now realized had been empty. Eleanor approached, bringing a cup of coffee. What are you thinking about, Richard? I'm thinking that it's strange how life works. I lost everything I thought was important to discover what really matters, and what really matters. Knowing that, when I die, I'll leave the world a little better than I found it. You already did. How many children did you save from the hands of those boys? I don't know, but I know that each of them now has a chance to grow up with dignity. And Ethan, do you still think about him? Richard sighed. I do. And I regret not having realized sooner that he needed professional help. Maybe if I had been less focused on giving him material things and more focused on really knowing him. Richard, you couldn't know that he wasn't your biological son. And even if you did, you couldn't know that he had inherited mental problems from his real father. But I could have paid more attention to the signs. I could have been less busy with business and more present as a father. Now you're present for dozens of children who need you. That doesn't erase the past, but it builds a better future. That night, Richard wrote a letter that he had postponed for months. It was addressed to Ethan in the clinic where he was interned. Ethan, I know that you may never read this letter, or if you do, you may not care about what I have to say. But I need to write it anyway. I want you to know that I forgive you. I forgive your cruelty, your lies, your attempt to destroy my life. I forgive because I understand now that you were sick and that I failed to realize that in time. I also want you to know that, despite discovering that I'm not your biological father, I still care about your well-being. I hope that the treatment helps you to find inner peace and that one day you can feel empathy for the people you hurt. If you ever want to see me, to ask for forgiveness from your victims, I'll be here. Not as your father, but as someone who wants to see you become a better person, with hope in your recovery, Richard. 6 months after the inauguration of the school, when Richard was beginning to believe that he had definitively left the past behind, an unexpected call brought back ghosts that he thought he had buried. Mr. Sterling? The voice on the other end of the line was hesitant, almost whispered. This is Dr. Carlson from Hope Clinic, where Ethan is interned. Richard felt his stomach clench. Since sending the letter months ago, he had not received any response or news about the young man. Doctor, has something happened? Ethan, well, he had a significant improvement in treatment, and he specifically asked to speak with you. With me. He says he wants to ask for forgiveness. Personally, the doctors think it may be an important part of his healing process. Richard was silent, watching from the school window the children playing at recess. One of them was Daisy, who visited regularly to help the younger ones with their lessons. Has he really changed, or is it another manipulation? Mr. Sterling, I can't guarantee anything, but what I can say is that he's been through a very intense process of therapy. He cried for weeks when he finally understood the dimension of the suffering he caused. And the other boys, Pete and Jake, they're also in treatment. In fact, it was the interaction between them that accelerated the healing process of everyone. When they started to talk honestly about what they were doing, the reality of what they were became unbearable. Richard hesitated. Part of him wanted to leave the past buried, to continue focusing on the new life he had built, but another part knew that it might be necessary to close that circle to really move on. When does he want to see me? Whenever you can. But doctor, there's something else you need to know. What? Isabel is also here. She started doing family therapy with Ethan 3 months ago. The information was like a punch to Richard's stomach. How is she? Devastated, when the reality of the whole situation finally fell on her. Well, she had a serious nervous breakdown. She lost her job at the clinic. She's facing several lawsuits, and most importantly, she's dealing with the guilt of having protected behavior that she knew was wrong. She admitted that she knew. Totally. In therapy, she confessed that she always knew that Ethan had cruel tendencies, but chose to ignore them because she didn't want to accept that she had failed as a mother and as a professional. That afternoon, Richard discussed the situation with Eleanor and Ms. Fairmont, who was visiting Daisy. "I think you should go," said Eleanor. "Not for Ethan or Isabel, but for yourself. To close that wound once and for all." "I agree," said Miss Fairmont. "Sometimes we need to confront our past to truly free ourselves from it." Daisy, who was listening to the conversation while drawing, looked up. "Mr. Richard, what is forgiveness?" The innocent question made all the adults silent. "Why do you want to know, sweetie?" "Because you're talking about a person who did bad things, and you're thinking about whether you should forgive her. I want to understand." Richard knelt down next to the girl. "Forgiveness is when you decide not to be angry forever with someone who hurt you, even if the person has done very bad things. And do we have to forgive always? You don't have to. But sometimes forgiving helps us to be at peace. Have you forgiven those boys who hurt me?" Daisy's direct question touched Richard deeply. "I'm trying, sweetie. It's still difficult. I've already forgiven them." "How so?" "Because if I keep thinking about the bad things they did, I'm going to be sad, and I don't want to be sad anymore." The simple wisdom of a 7-year-old child made Richard make his decision. 3 days later, he was driving to Oklahoma City, where Hope Clinic was located. Throughout the way, his thoughts oscillated between expectation and apprehension. What would he find there? An Ethan genuinely repentant, or just a more sophisticated version of his manipulations? The clinic was a surprisingly welcoming place, with well-kept gardens and an environment that conveyed peace. Dr. Carlson greeted him personally. "Before meeting with Ethan, I would like to talk with his main psychologist so that you better understand the process he has gone through." Dr. Helen Shaw was a middle-aged woman with gentle eyes but a serious expression. She led Richard to her office and offered coffee. "Mr. Sterling, Ethan has told me a lot about you, and especially about what happened in your family." "What did he tell you?" "The truth. All of it. About the tortures he inflicted on the children. About the lies he told about how he manipulated his mother to protect him. And do you believe that this confession is genuine?" "I believe it, because it came accompanied by something that manipulators rarely demonstrate: true emotional suffering." Ethan cried for weeks when he finally understood the dimension of the evil he caused. "But he may be faking this suffering." "He may be, but there are signs that are difficult to fake. Constant nightmares where he relives the humiliations he imposed on the children, panic attacks when he sees young children playing, and mainly a total refusal to position himself as a victim." "How so?" "Manipulators always position themselves as victims of the circumstances. Ethan does the opposite, assumes total responsibility for his actions and refuses to accept any justification that diminishes his guilt. Dr. Shaw showed some reports. Look at these drawings he made during the therapy sessions. The images were disturbing. They showed children crying, surrounded by shadowy figures that clearly represented Ethan and his friends. But the most impressive thing was how he had drawn himself, not as a powerful young man, but as a distorted monster. He sees himself like this, exactly like this. And that's both a sign of progress and a challenge to the treatment. He needs to learn to see himself as someone capable of change, not just as an irreversible monster. And Isabel? How is she dealing with all this? Dr. Shaw sighed. Isabel is facing perhaps the most difficult process of all. She needs to accept that she failed not only as a mother, but as a mental health professional, that she ignored obvious signs because she didn't want to see reality. Can I see her too? She's very fragile, Mr. Sterling, but if you want, I can ask if she accepts. When the moment of the meeting with Ethan finally arrived, Richard didn't know what to expect. The young man who entered the visiting room was unrecognizable. Thin, hair cut very short, eyes that couldn't sustain visual contact for more than a few seconds. "Hi, Dad," said Ethan, his voice almost a whisper. "Hi, Ethan." They were silent for a few minutes, each observing the changes in the other. "Thank you for coming," said Ethan finally. "I know I don't deserve it." "Why did you want to see me?" "Because I need to ask for forgiveness, and because I need to tell you some things that I never told anyone." "What things?" Ethan took a deep breath, clearly preparing himself for something difficult. "About why I did those things with the children. The real truth." "What was the real truth?" "I didn't do it because it was fun. I did it because I felt pleasure in seeing suffering. And that scared me so much that I tried to rationalize it as if it were just a joke." The confession was said with so much pain that Richard felt, for the first time in years, something similar to compassion for the young man. "When did you realize that there was something wrong?" "I always knew. Since I was little, I felt things that I knew I shouldn't feel. I saw other children cry and felt joy. I saw injured animals and wanted to hurt them more." "Why did you never tell this to anyone?" "Because I was afraid. And because Mom always said that I was special, that it was normal to be different from others." "Ethan, you know that I'm not your biological father, right?" "I know. And you know what's the most ironic thing? You were more of a father to me than my biological father could ever have been. Even being a horrible person, you tried to teach me values that I simply couldn't absorb." For the first time, Ethan managed to look directly into Richard's eyes. "Dad, I know I have no right to ask this, but could you forgive me? Not because I deserve it, but because maybe that will help me to forgive myself one day." Richard looked at that broken young man, so different from the cold sociopath he had known, and realized that Daisy was right. Forgiving wasn't about what the other person deserved, it was about one's own inner peace. "I forgive you, Ethan, and I hope you find a way to use this second chance to do good in the world." When he left the clinic that afternoon, Richard felt lighter than he had felt in years. The circle was finally closed, and he could move on knowing that he had done everything he could both to protect innocence and to offer redemption to those who needed it. The next day, Dr. Carlson called Richard. Before he even left Oklahoma City. "Mr. Sterling, Isabel found out that you were here yesterday. She's asking to talk with you." "How is she?" "Very fragile, but the therapists think it may be important for her healing process." Richard hesitated. Seeing Ethan had been difficult, but necessary. Seeing Isabel would be a completely different experience. She had been his companion for over 20 years, the woman he had loved and who had betrayed him in ways that still hurt when he thought about it. Does she really want to see me, or do the doctors think it's a good idea? She's the one who asked. In fact, she's been asking for weeks, but we weren't sure if you would accept. Where would the meeting be? Here at the clinic, in a controlled environment. If it starts to get too difficult for either of you, we can interrupt. An hour later, Richard was sitting in a small but comfortable room, waiting for the woman who had once been his wife. When Isabel entered, accompanied by a nurse, he was shocked by her appearance. The elegant and confident woman he had known had disappeared. Isabel was too thin, with grey hair that she no longer bothered to dye, and eyes that carried a deep sadness. She sat down in the opposite armchair, keeping a distance, as if she didn't feel worthy of being closer. "Hi, Richard." "Hi, Isabel." They were silent for a few minutes, both avoiding direct eye contact. "Thank you for agreeing to see me," she said finally. "I know I don't deserve it. None of us is here to talk about what we deserve or not. How are you? I heard about the school, about the work you're doing." "I'm well, different but well. And Daisy, how is she?" "Daisy is great. Recovered her memories, is with her family, studying, being a child as she should be." Isabel started to cry silently. "I almost destroyed that girl. I protected who was hurting her instead of protecting her." "Why, Isabel, that's the question that has tormented me for over a year. Why did you do that?" "Because—" She stopped, wiping away the tears. "Because if I admitted that Ethan was a sociopath, I would have to admit that I had failed as a mother and as a professional. My entire identity was based on being someone who understood children. But you really didn't notice the signs? A child psychologist with decades of experience?" "I noticed." The confession came out as a whisper. "I noticed since he was 5 years old and tortured a neighbor's cat. I noticed when he lied too easily. I noticed when he showed pleasure with the suffering of other children. And even so, I rationalized. I told myself that it was just a phase, that he would overcome it, that I could fix him with love and patience." "Isabel, you allowed dozens of children to suffer to protect your self-image." "I know." She covered her face with her hands. "I know, and it kills me every day. Every night I wake up thinking about those children, imagining the trauma they carry because of my cowardice, and about me, about us being married for over 20 years, based on a lie about paternity." Isabel looked up, finally meeting Richard's gaze. "That's the hardest part to accept. I not only lied about the paternity, but I used you. I let you feel like a failed father when the problem was never your ability to be a father." "Why did you never tell me the truth?" "In the beginning, because I was afraid of losing you. Then because I was afraid of losing the life we had built. And in the end, because I was afraid of losing Ethan to his biological father." "The biological father?" "He reappeared in our life when Ethan was 12 years old. He wanted to meet his son. I refused, said that you were his father and that there was no room for another person. He accepted that? No. He threatened to tell you everything if I didn't let him see Ethan. That's when I started protecting Ethan even more intensely. I was afraid that any behavioral problem of his would give ammunition to the biological father to question my ability as a mother." Richard processed the information. "So you knew that I would discover the truth eventually?" "I knew that it was a possibility, but I chose to bet that I could keep the lie forever. And when Ethan started torturing children, when I found out, I thought of 2 options: expose him and risk that the whole truth would come to light, or protect him and try to fix him in secret. And you chose the second option. I chose the cowardly option, and I almost destroyed you in the process." They were silent again. Richard watched the woman who had been his wife, trying to reconcile the broken person in front of him with the confident woman he thought he knew. "Isabel, did you really love me at any time?" The question made her cry more intensely. "I loved you, yes. Not in the pure way you deserved, but I loved you. You were safety, stability, kindness, everything I wanted for myself and for Ethan. But not enough to be honest with me. No. And that's something I'll carry for the rest of my life. What do you intend to do when you leave here? I don't know if I'm going to leave. The doctors say I can, but Richard, I destroyed my career, my reputation, my marriage. I face several lawsuits for professional negligence. I don't know how to rebuild a life after all this. The same way I rebuilt mine. One day at a time, trying to do good things to compensate for the bad ones. You forgive me. Richard thought about the question that Daisy had asked days before, about what forgiveness was. I'm working on it, Isabel. It still hurts, I still feel betrayed, but I'm trying to forgive. And, Ethan, have you forgiven him? Yes, because I realized that he was sick, and that part of the responsibility for not having treated that illness was yours and mine. Isabel stood up, signaling that the conversation was coming to an end. Richard, I know I have no right to ask anything, but could you tell me about the school, about the work you're doing? Why? Because I want to know that at least one good thing came out of all this suffering. I want to know that you found a way to transform pain into purpose. Richard spent the next 20 minutes talking about the Fairmont Sterling School, about the children they served, about the future projects. He saw Isabel's eyes light up slightly for the first time during the entire conversation. You know what impresses me the most? She said when he finished. It's that you're doing exactly what I should have done as a child psychologist, protecting vulnerable children instead of protecting those who hurt them. It's never too late to start doing the right thing, Isabel. For me, it may be. No one is going to trust a psychologist who failed so spectacularly with her own son. Then find another way to help. Volunteer. Help organizations that take care of children. Use your experience to teach other professionals to recognize signs that you ignored. Do you think I could do that after everything I've done? I think you have an obligation to do it. You have knowledge and experience that can help other children. Using that would be a way to honor the suffering you helped cause. When Isabel left the room, accompanied again by the nurse, Richard felt strangely at peace. He had closed another painful chapter of his life, but this time with the hope that everyone involved could find ways to transform their mistakes into opportunities to do good. On the drive back to Phoenix, Arizona, he thought about how life had a strange way of reorganizing itself. He had lost a family based on lies, but found a family based on genuine love and shared purpose. When he arrived at the school and saw Daisy helping a younger child with a drawing, he knew he had made all the right decisions, even when they seemed the most difficult in the world. 2 years after the meetings at the clinic, when Richard had completely adjusted to his new life, an unexpected discovery brought a twist that would forever change his understanding of the whole story. It was a Saturday morning, and Daisy, now 9 years old, was helping Richard organize old school files when she found a dusty box in the storage room. "Uncle Richard, whose things are these?" she asked, opening the box that contained documents, photographs, and some personal items. "I don't know, sweetie. It must be from the former owner of the property." Daisy began to examine the photographs with curiosity. They were old, black and white images, showing a family with several children at different times. "Look at this photo, Uncle Richard. This girl looks like me when I was younger." Richard approached for a better look. The resemblance was indeed striking, the same facial structure, the same large, expressive eyes. "It must be a coincidence, sweetie. But look here on the back of the photo, there's a name written." Richard turned the photograph over and felt his heart race. Written by hand, in careful handwriting, was Joaquina Cavalcanti, 6 years old, 1960. "Cavalcanti? Like you?" "That's very strange," Daisy murmured. Let me see the other photos. They examined all the contents of the box together. There were dozens of photographs of different generations of the Cavalcanti family, old documents, and most importantly, a diary that seemed to have been written by several people over decades. Uncle Richard, did this property ever belong to my family? I don't know, sweetie, but let's find out. They spent the rest of the morning reading the diary and examining the documents. The story that emerged was both fascinating and disturbing. The property had indeed belonged to the Cavalcanti family until the 1980s, when it was sold under mysterious circumstances. The diary revealed that the family had faced serious financial difficulties after a series of failed investments. But the most shocking discovery was on the last pages of the diary, written by Daisy's great-grandmother in 1985. Today we lost our home. Richard Sterling, that ambitious young man who grew up in poverty, managed to force us to sell it for a fraction of its real value. He used our debts against us, pressured our creditors, manipulated the situation to leave us with no choice. We are leaving today the house where my family has lived for 3 generations. May God forgive this man, because I cannot. Richard felt as if he had been punched in the stomach. My God! What's wrong, Uncle Richard? Daisy, I need to call. Your aunt, Miss Fairmont, now. An hour later, Miss Fairmont arrived accompanied by Judge Fernando, who had fully recovered and resumed his activities. When they saw the documents and photographs, both were visibly shaken. Our family property, said the judge with a choked voice. Dad always said we had been forced to sell it for far less than it was worth. And now it belongs to me, Richard said, the realization crashing down on him like an avalanche. Miss Fairmont picked up the diary and read the last entry aloud. The silence that followed was heavy and awkward. Mr. Sterling, said the judge finally, did you know about this? I remember the Cavalcanti family. It was one of the first properties I managed to acquire when I was building my company. But at the time, to me, it was just a business. A business that destroyed a family, said Miss Fairmont, unable to hide the hurt in her voice. Daisy looked from one adult to the other, trying to understand the tension that had settled in the room. Does that mean Uncle Richard took our house from our family? The innocent question cut deeper than any accusation. Richard knelt beside the girl. Yes, sweetie, a long time ago, when I was a different person, I did bad things to get money. And one of those things was forcing your family to sell this property. But you didn't know it was our family. No, I didn't. But that doesn't make what I did any less wrong. Judge Fernando walked to the window, observing the garden where his great-grandmother had played decades ago. It's a cruel irony, he said. The man who destroyed our family property was the same one who saved our daughter, and now uses this property to help children like her, added Miss Fairmont, her voice softening slightly. That doesn't change. The fact that I built my initial fortune on the suffering of families like yours, Richard said, and you have every right to hate me for it. Daisy approached Richard and took his hand. I don't hate you, Uncle Richard. Why not, sweetie? Because you're not the same person who did those bad things anymore. You've changed. But the bad things I did don't disappear just because I've changed. No, but you're doing good things now. You're taking care of children like you took care of me. The judge turned from the window. Mr. Sterling, what do you intend to do with this information? I want to return the property to you. What do you mean? This property belongs to Daisy's family by right. Even though I acquired it legally at the time, I know now that it was through questionable tactics. I want to transfer the deed back to you. Miss Fairmont was shocked. Mr. Sterling, that's very generous, but it's not generosity. It's justice. I should have done this decades ago. And the school? The work that's being done here? That depends on you. If you want me to continue managing the project here, I'm happy to do so. If you'd prefer me to leave, I understand perfectly." Daisy looked at her father with a worried expression. "Dad, can Uncle Richard keep taking care of the school?" "Why is it important to you, daughter?" "Because he's good at it, and because without him, many children won't have anyone to take care of them." The judge exchanged a long look with his sister. Both seemed to be going through an internal process of reconciliation between the past and the present. "Mr. Sterling," said Miss Fairmont finally, "accepting the return of the property would be a way to honor our family, but we would like you to continue the work here. As a partner of the family," added the judge, "not as someone who owes us something, but as someone who shares our values about protecting vulnerable children." "Are you sure?" "I have one condition," said the judge. "I want us to expand the project. I want this school to become a model for the entire state." "And I have another condition," said Miss Fairmont. "I want Daisy to be officially the ambassador of the project, so that other children see that it is possible to overcome trauma and find families that love them." Daisy smiled for the first time since the beginning of the conversation. "Does that mean I can keep visiting here every week?" "It means you will always have a home here," said Richard, moved, "on the property that has always been your family's." That afternoon, as they walked through the gardens of the property, now officially back in the Cavalcanti family, Daisy made an observation that perfectly summarized the complexity of the situation. "Uncle Richard, do you think that sometimes people do bad things so that good things can happen later?" "What do you mean, sweetie? If you hadn't taken our house from our family a long time ago, you wouldn't have had the money to become rich. And if you weren't rich, you wouldn't have been able to help me when I needed it. And if you didn't help me, maybe I would never have found my family again." The child's logic, both simple and profound, made Richard reflect on the mysteries of fate and redemption. "I think sometimes life has a strange way of fixing the mistakes we make," he said. "But that doesn't make the mistakes right. It just gives us a chance to do better. And you're doing better." "I'm trying." "That's all that matters," said Daisy, taking his hand as they watched children playing in the garden where generations of her family had played before her. The discovery had closed a circle that Richard didn't even know was open, proving that sometimes the universe has a poetic way of balancing the accounts between the past and the present. 5 years after the discovery about the property, on a sunny December morning, Richard was in the school garden, preparing the final details for a very special ceremony. At 62, his hair was completely grey, but his eyes shone with a peace he had never felt before. "Uncle Richard!" The familiar voice made him turn around. Daisy, now a young woman of 14, ran towards him carrying an official envelope. "What do you have there, sweetie?" "The approval letter. The Daisy Cavalcanti School will officially become a state foundation." Richard embraced the girl who had completely changed his life. In recent years, the school had expanded exponentially, serving over 300 children in socially vulnerable situations. The project had become a model for the entire Arizona and would now be replicated in other states. "I can't believe we did it," he said, moved. "We did it because you never gave up on doing the right thing," replied Daisy, who at 14 already demonstrated an impressive maturity. At that moment, Miss Fairmont arrived, accompanied by a woman Richard did not expect to see. "Richard," said Miss Fairmont, "I have a surprise for you." The woman accompanying her was Isabel, but a completely transformed version of the one he had met at the clinic years ago. Her hair was well groomed, she had gained healthy weight, and most importantly, there was a serenity in her eyes that he had never seen before. "Hi, Richard," she said, hesitant. "Isabel, how are you?" "Better, much better. I'm working at an NGO in Phoenix, Arizona, that serves children who have suffered from abuse. I used my experience to train other professionals to recognize signs that I ignored. That's good to know. Actually, I came here today because I wanted to participate in the ceremony, if you allow it. Richard looked at Daisy, who gave a small nod of approval. Of course you can participate. Ms. Fairmont smiled. And there's someone else who wants to be here today. A young man of approximately 23 years approached the group. Richard took a few seconds to recognize him. It was Ethan, but completely transformed. Tall, with well-groomed hair, eyes that could hold eye contact, and a posture that showed healthy confidence. "Hi, Dad," said Ethan, using a term he hadn't used in years. "Ethan, how are you?" "I'm good. I finished my degree in psychology, and I work at a rehabilitation clinic for teenagers with behavioral problems." "Psychology?" "I wanted to understand what happened to me so I could help other young people who go through the same thing. It's my way of compensating for the harm I caused." Daisy watched the scene with interest, seeing for the first time the young man who had once been her source of terror. "You're Ethan," she said, not as a question but as a statement. And you're Daisy." He hesitated for a moment. "I know I have no right to ask this, but could you forgive me one day?" Daisy studied his face carefully. "I forgave you a long time ago, because holding on to anger only made me feel sad." "Thank you," said Ethan, visibly moved. "And I promise that I dedicate every day of my life to trying to compensate for the suffering I caused." The ceremony of transforming the school into a state foundation began at noon, with the presence of political authorities, educators from all over the state, and, most importantly, dozens of families whose children had been benefited by the project. During his speech, Richard reflected on the extraordinary journey that had led him there. 8 years ago, he said to the audience, I was a man rich in money, but poor in purpose. I had a family I thought I knew, a thriving company, a respectable reputation, but all of that was built on weak foundations, lies, greed, and ignorance about what really matters in life. He paused, looking at Daisy in the front row. It was a 6-year-old girl who taught me that family is not about blood or social conventions. It's about choosing to love and protect each other, even when it costs everything we thought we valued. The audience listened in respectful silence. Today, we are transforming this school into a foundation that will serve thousands of children in the coming years. But I want everyone to know that each child served here carries a little of the wisdom that Daisy taught me, that it is possible to transform pain into purpose, suffering into solidarity, and mistakes into opportunities to do better. When he finished the speech, Daisy took the stage to speak as a representative of the children served by the school. My name is Daisy Cavalcanti, she began, her voice clear and confident. 8 years ago, I lived on the streets, went hungry, and suffered at the hands of people who thought it was fun to see children like me suffering. The audience was moved by the brutal honesty of the young woman. But this school taught me that it doesn't matter how your story begins. What matters is how you choose to continue writing it. And I choose to continue my story by helping other children find their families, just as I found mine. She looked directly at Richard. Uncle Richard always says that I saved his life. But the truth is that we saved each other. And now we save dozens of other children every year. After the ceremony, as the guests gathered in the garden for a reception, Eleanor approached Richard. At 82, she still maintained the energy and kindness that had always characterized her. Richard, my dear, I'm so proud of you. Eleanor, you taught me that caring for children is the most important thing we can do in life. You've learned the lesson well. At that moment, a small child ran up and hugged Richard's legs. It was Pete, 5 years old, who had arrived at the school 3 months ago in a situation of extreme family neglect. "Uncle Richard, can I show my drawing to the important lady?" he asked, referring to a state government official who was visiting. "Of course, Pete, but first, tell me what you drew." "I drew our school family. Look, this is you, this is Aunt Eleanor, this is Daisy, and these are all the children." The drawing showed dozens of figures holding hands, all smiling, surrounded by colorful birds, a clear influence from the first drawings that Daisy had made years ago. "It's beautiful, Pete. Why did you draw birds?" "Because Daisy taught me that when we're sad, we can imagine we're a bird and can fly to where we feel safe." Richard looked at Daisy, who watched the conversation with a smile. The girl who once drew birds as a symbol of escape now taught other children to use the same image as a symbol of hope. In the late afternoon, when all the guests had already left, Richard walked alone through the gardens of the property that now housed much more than a school. It housed a legacy of transformation and redemption. Ethan approached him, hesitant. "Dad, can I talk to you?" "Of course. I wanted to thank you." "Why?" "For not giving up on doing the right thing, even when it meant losing me. Because it was that choice that saved me, too." "How so?" "If you had protected me from justice, I never would have received the treatment I needed. I never would have understood the harm I was causing. I never would have had the chance to become a better person." They walked in silence for a few minutes. "Ethan, you know I've always loved you, even when I couldn't understand who you were." "I know. And it was that love that gave me the strength to change when I finally had the opportunity." As the sun began to set, Richard found himself in the same spot where he had talked to Daisy for the first time, in front of the building where his company once stood. The building now housed several NGOs that served needy families in the area. Daisy joined him, now almost as tall as he was. "What are you thinking about, Uncle Richard?" "I'm thinking about how life has a mysterious way of leading us exactly where we need to be. Even when the path is difficult, especially when the path is difficult." They watched children playing in the square in front, their joyful voices echoing in the afternoon air. "Uncle Richard, can I confess something to you?" "Of course, sweetie. Sometimes I'm glad I went through all those bad things." "Why?" "Because if I hadn't gone through them, I never would have met you. And I never would have learned that family isn't who you're born with, but who chooses to stay with you." Richard embraced the young woman who had transformed his life, realizing that she was right. All the mistakes, all the suffering, all the difficult decisions had led to this moment, a property full of safe and loved children, a foundation that would impact thousands of lives, and a chosen family united by love and common purpose. "You know what else, sweetie?" "What?" "I finally understood that true success is not measured by what we accumulate, but by what we leave behind. And what we are leaving behind will last much longer than any fortune." As they walked back home, Richard reflected on how his story had begun, with a little girl asking for a few coins, and evolved into a complete transformation of values, purposes, and definitions of family. Daisy was right when she said they saved each other. But more than that, they had discovered that saving each other is what gives true meaning to human life. And so, under the starry sky of Phoenix, Arizona, the story that began with suffering and cruelty found its end in redemption, forgiveness, and proof that it's never too late to choose to love instead of hurt, protect instead of exploit, and build instead of destroy. The Daisy Cavalcanti Foundation would continue its work for generations, but its true legacy would be the lesson that a single courageous choice can change not only one life, but create waves of transformation that touch hundreds of other lives. And all because a man decided to really listen to a child, and a child decided to really trust an adult.